Hey guys! Part 6 of What If Naruto Learned Martial Arts and Became the Night Fist. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 14. Now there's no reason to get so uptight, Fenrir. Just do a few little errands for me and your little girlfriend won't be harmed and you can keep living your happy little normal life waiting tables. Just wait for me to call you and I'll give you your first assignment. Oh, and Fenrir better start moving. Don't want to keep Renka waiting, do you? Smash. That was the sound of a solid block of concrete being reduced to powder by the force of one of Naruto's strong kicks. After the incident with Loki, the blonde ex-ninja quickly found himself with some deep-seated rage that he needed to let out. So he quickly gave a call to Renka before heading to an old construction site that had long since been abandoned. Strangely easy to find, by the way. The end result was the blonde quickly venting his rage at his new predicament by using the concrete blocks as target practice for some of his capoeira kicks. Thanks in part to Soul's insane training, his legs had become strong and hard enough to where even the consistent repetition of said action didn't even register to him. The blonde's cold blue eyes carried a look of silent fury, which had managed to slowly be quelled after his bout of random destruction. In truth, the action of breaking random objects did make him feel a little better, or at the very least keep him from going on a killing spree. Yet he couldn't help but release a tired and frustrated sigh as he looked up to the sky, his eyes staring at the stars now visible through the night. Guess I spent more time venting than I realized. With another sigh, he found himself rubbing the back of his head in irrational, as he knew what this meant. Great, on top of everything else I'm dealing with now, Renka's gonna chew me out for being late. Though at the mention of his female friend he again found himself reminded of Loki's threat against her, and the image quickly shifted to Renka being attacked by the Mafia on her own. The idea of this image sent a chill down his spine, and he did his best to wipe it from his thoughts. Damn it, what the hell am I supposed to do? His question went unanswered as expected, and he simply kicked a lone pebble on the ground before making his way to the exit of the site, his mind trying to form some kind of way out of the situation he found himself in. No matter what happens, I won't let anything happen to Renka or anyone else I care about. If I have to, I may even have to kill Loki. Admittedly, said decision didn't sound very hard or difficult to make good on since he'd already killed plenty in the past. However, all of those people had been power-made psychos intent on causing mass destruction and murder throughout the world. Loki was little more than a stuck-up prick with a massive ego. As such, killing him didn't seem particularly appropriate. Also, Naruto again frowned as his mind flashed back not just to Renka but all of his recently made friends. In truth, part of the reason he'd kept his gang life secret was because he was afraid it might lead him to also reveal even more about his history. That is, his life as a shinobi, and the fact he'd killed already. Ignoring the fact they probably label him as crazy for saying he was a ninja from some world of super-powered individuals, it was clear that Renka and her family had a distinct dislike of killing. Hence he knew that if said skeleton ever came out of the closest, then Renka and the others would most likely reject him as a murderer, the thought of which hit him harder than any blow. As such, he had to keep from going too far back to his shinobi ways and not under any circumstances kill somebody if he could help it. Yet that still left the matter of how he was going to dig himself out of the current hole he found himself in. There has to be some way to get around Loki's spies, but what am I supposed to do? I know I can't just attack him. The second I touch the guy, his goons will signal those mafia bastards on Renka. Of course, the more the blonde thought about this, the less he paid attention to his surroundings, hence the reason he quickly failed to notice that he was gradually making his way toward Gekurin, and also why he failed to notice a certain someone waiting at the door for him, with a rather peeved look on her face. Of course, the blonde was simply too focused on his thoughts to pay it any mind, at least until he slowly started picking up the hostile aura his friend was giving off. Damn it, maybe if I try that trick with some ninja wire, a rusty kunai and a banana, it might work. Or, why do I suddenly get the feeling I pissed someone off? Eyes quickly widened as he looked up just in time to meet the business end of a rolling pin. Surprisingly, despite all of his intense physical training, it still managed to hurt like hell. Oh, whoa. With a hint of frustration, he quickly pushed the pin away and frowned at Renka, trying to look intimidating, though failing due in part to the pin-shaped bruise running down his face, while Renka merely looked away coyly, her previous fury now replaced with simple enjoyment. "Sorry, Naruto, but I warned you what would happen if you were late getting back again." Rubbing his bruised face slightly, he merely grunted in slight frustration at the girl's action. "Even so, must you always smack me over the head when I'm thinking? You know you could tap me on the shoulder or just poke me. Ever consider that before trying to smash my face in?" The response he got was a hard tap to the shoulder, followed by several painful pokes to the face, all of which Renka performed with a gleeful smile on her face. "You're right, Naruto, this is more fun. Thanks for the info." The frustrated blonde merely growled at his face and body again being abused by said girl, even though he had a moment ago been worrying about her safety and what actions to take against Loki. For now he felt it best to push said thoughts aside so as not to draw any suspicion. So with that in mind, he merely let out a growl and rather simple. "That is not what I meant, Renka, and you know it." The green-eyed girl merely stuck out her tongue in a playful manner in response to her friend's anguish. "Sorry, Naruto, but you just make it so easy. Besides, you said you'd be back as soon as you were done talking with your friend. What did you want to talk about with him anyway?" At the mere mention of his so-called friend, the blonde had to again restrain himself from showing hostile emotions towards Loki, knowing doing so would arouse suspicion, no matter how immensely he wanted to make said individual suffer. Quickly swallowing the fury like a spoonful of cold medicine, he readopted his normal natural face and offered a light shrug. "Just wanted to ask how I've been and why I haven't been talking to him. Frankly, I didn't feel much like talking and tried to leave pretty quickly." This got Renka both curious and a little sad, considering it sounded like Naruto might have lost a friend. "Oh, did you guys have a disagreement or something? Renka, you don't even know the half of it." Again Renka found herself frowning as she saw her friend's face harden, if only for an instant, making it clear that something went down, but she couldn't quite place her finger on it. "Great, more secrets. As if he wasn't already keeping enough from me. This is so frustrating. I can't press the issue cause then he'll never say anything, but if I don't then he just keep pulling this." "Stay calm, Renka. Remember what Master Hakubi said, take it slow. He'll tell me when he's ready, stay calm." After indulging herself in a brief and mental war, Renka decided to drop the issue with Naruto, at least for now anyway. Said blonde took notice of this and quickly softened his gaze, trying to regain his slight smile, taking solace in the fact that at least for the moment things were calm and hopefully nothing else would ruin the moment. "Hey Naruto." The blonde's train of thought quickly halted as he slowly turned to look at Renka, who seemed a little uneasy but also a bit calmer than her usual self. To an extent he dare say she came across as a bit vulnerable, a far cry from her normally loud and boisterous self. Of course not one to leave his friend hanging, the blonde quickly offered her a small smile, offering her his fully attention. "Oh sorry Renka, was a little lost in thought there. Something you want to say to me?" Once again, just like a few days before, Renka once again found her heart speeding up, due mainly to the fact that despite how things might have gotten earlier, she did feel like she was managing to form a real connection with the blonde and was more sure than ever that now was likely the best time to capitalize on the situation. Well, that and a little advice from Hakubi. Flashback hour or two ago. Hakubi watched things in Gekkourin progress as Ryu and Shokatsu did their best to serve all the customers currently in the restaurant. Truth be told, things weren't nearly as bad as he made them out to be, but being the sly old man that he was, his real motive for bringing Renka and Naruto back was to hear all the details about how their relationship had advanced. Just thinking about it brought a chuckle to the old master as he envisioned all the possible things the two teens did while they were away. Hopefully Renka finally managed to take the next step and progress things along with Naruto. The boy is fairly bright, but when it comes to simple teenage affairs like dating, I feel like he won't understand anything without some effort. Oddly enough, the feeling wasn't exclusive to the old master, as a good number of the patrons in the restaurant, as well, were intrigued by the pair's current state of affairs. Thanks in part to their bodyguard services at the restaurant, and somewhat entertaining daily arguments, Naruto and Renka had become quite popular among the restaurant's many customers, several of whom had been coming back to the store just to watch their progress, and given the near high point before the infamous phone call, they were starving for some new material. The activity of the restaurant quickly grew quiet as the sight of Renka was caught by those watching, entering the establishment, alone. Hakubi along with the two disciples raised eyebrows at the blonde's absence, knowing full well he wouldn't up and leave Renka unless it was serious. Though given the rather placid look on her face it likely wasn't too serious to register any alarms. As such Hakubi did his best to push down any suspicions he had and welcomed the girl openly. "Glad to see you're back, Renka. I trust everything with your father went rather well?" The mischievous brunette adopted a deceitfully cute smile with her hands on her hips and nose high in the air. "Let's just say that Daddy Dearest won't be making any travel arrangements in the foreseeable future." Hakubi ended up snickering even more at the thought of Kensei literally bowing to the mercy of his 16-year-old daughter. It was simply too funny not to laugh at. "Glad to have you back, Renka, but where's that idiot Naruto? Normally you don't go anywhere without him and vice versa. Did something happen?" Shokatsu, who'd entered the conversation, quickly brought up part of what everyone else was thinking, bringing the collective gazes of those present on Renka, now blushing mad at the implication. Ryu of course elbowed his buddy in the ribs for his somewhat poorly timed comment. "Dude, seriously, show some tact." Of course Renka quickly let out in a somewhat loud voice, "Nothing happened. Naruto just needed to talk with a friend of his and will be back soon enough." Geez. Several patrons and Hakubi let out a collective sigh of relief at that, knowing the potential relationship was still possible. With a sinister gleam in his eye, Hakubi decided to push on further. "Oh well, that's good. I'm a bit surprised. I didn't think Naruto had any other friends, at least not ones he'd been willing to mention up to this point. Though I suppose that's a mood issue right now, so moving on, tell me, have you made any progress as of late with you-know-who?" Renka's normal blush went full on crimson to the point where people thought the blood from her face was going to burst like a balloon. At first the girl was too embarrassed to even manage about a single word, but her whole body was shaking with either could be described as embarrassment or frustration. Of course it didn't take long for it to boil over and Renka to pretty much shout to the heavens. "No, I didn't. Okay. I had a bunch of chances, but I blew every one of them. Why is this so damn hard?" After another second of shouting, the blue-haired time bomb slowly exhaled, trying to regain the oxygen she just lost screaming, while Hakubi just sighed at her lack of progression and tact. Collective silence was held by everyone in the restaurant, all their eyes focused on Renka, said girl currently and obviously emotionally chaotic. Hence Hakubi and his disciples weren't too surprised to see Renka quickly glare angrily at the gawking customers with a furious look in her eyes. "What are you looking at?" Everyone quickly redirected their attention to their food or the ways, Renka still huffing, her face still red and steam coming out of her ears. With a sigh, Hakubi quickly walked up to Renka and then slowly led her back to the kitchen, offering the boys a look that read, "Keep things in check while I handle this." The two nodded in response and returned to their tasks while Hakubi led Renka to the kitchen. Once they were safely behind closed doors, he quickly turned his attention to Renka. "Okay, Renka, now that everything's nice and quiet, why don't you just let me know what the problem is?" The girl let out a breath as she calmed her some conflicted thoughts before thinking back to all that had taken place the last few days. "I know that I mainly dragged Naruto along to help with my dad. But I was hoping that somehow I might finally have gotten the chance to make him see me as more than a friend, or at least ask him out finally." Hakubi nodded as he shined his glasses with his sleeve while holding on to Renka's words. "And yet things didn't go how you'd hoped, did they?" The girl threw her hands up in frustration. "No, I mean we spent some time at that Ryozanpaku place Dad lives in, and well, let's just say things didn't go perfectly there. Then at the pool I really thought I could get his attention, and it seemed to work. Just not how I thought it would in the end." That actually got Hakubi to raise an eyebrow and a question mark appeared over his head. "And what exactly happened at the pool? Nothing too outrageous, I hope?" The old man was met with a harsh slap to the head in response, while Renka shook somewhat in amusing anger at the implication. "Get your head out the gutter. Sheesh, Hakubi, you're just as bad as my dad is sometimes." Lightly wiping the bump on his head, the old man chuckled at the violent response, ignoring the light pain in his head. Sorry, you know how I get from time to time. Anyway, please continue." Letting out a light sigh, Renka immediately continued her retelling. "Well, after the pool we got your call and decided to head back." Renka paused for a moment, gaining a somewhat faraway look in her eyes as she recalled the events that happened after. This got Hakubi's attention in full, as it was obvious to him that something substantial happened, and I imagined something serious took place. Rather than nod, Renka simply looked on with a somewhat placid look on her face and a light blush growing. As we were walking, we started talking, and Naruto actually mentioned some parts of his past. It actually caused him to act differently than he usually did. I can't explain it, but it seemed like there was an entirely different side to him I'd never seen before. And I don't know why, but something about it just felt so right, like it's who he truly is. The more Renka talked about it, the more her tone shifted to one of what he could say longing and affection. Hakubi was of course somewhat surprised that the normally quiet blonde had even been willing to share anything about his past, but the idea he could do such a drastic personality swap was quite an interesting revelation. However, likely the most interesting thing about it was how said change seemed to affect Renka, almost making her feelings for the boy even stronger than they already were. So what's the problem, Renka? From the way you make it sound, it's as if you want to be with Naruto even more than ever. The blue-haired kung fu fighter's distant gaze and ever-reddening face made it obvious that Hakubi was right, though now it seemed like the hurdles she'd have to overcome had grown. Ever since I first met him, I always felt like he's been concealing himself from me, like the way he acts isn't his true self. I guess it's partially because of that's kept me from just walking up and asking him out. Now that I've gotten a chance to see what Naruto's really like, even if it's only for a moment, I'm more sure than ever about my feelings for him. But now I don't think I can ask him. I mean, it was already a huge effort before. How can I even hope to do it now? Renka heard Hakubi sigh at her words before feeling a light pressure on her shoulder, looking up to find the old master gazing at her with a kind and supportive expression that presented more words than could be spoken. Renka, love is never something that's easy. It requires some effort, and you have to be willing to take a chance even if you don't feel fully up to it. From what you've told me, it's clear you truly care about Naruto, and that should be all you need to step forward. Trust your feelings, Renka, and don't let your fear hold you back, because that, my dear, would be more painful than anything you may be feeling now. Renka slowly felt a sense of confidence grow in the pit of her stomach as Hakubi's words resounded through her like the sound of a bell. A confident expression grew on her face as she tightened her fists with a serious yet somewhat humorous expression. Naruto better be ready, cause the next time I see him we're going on a date whether he's ready or not. Flashback ends. Naruto watched his coworker with mild fascination, as up until a few moments ago she'd been acting rather reserved, something he'd come accustomed to, as she seemed to act that way around him a lot. In a way it reminded him of Hinata, though he wasn't totally crazy about the shy thing, as he was more accustomed to seeing Renka's more boisterous take no prisoners attitude. Sure, she'd beat him up on occasion and give him some serious lip, but it actually brought some much-needed life into his daily routine, and well, with Renka it just seemed to click. Though he quickly found like maybe he'd prefer the shy Renka, as in a matter of seconds she was now gazing at him with what looked like fire in her eyes. Not the metaphor. No, as in he could literally see tiny fireballs burning brightly in her eyes, and her hand was currently curled up into a tight fist. Her arm shaking, and the normally fearsome blonde was suddenly wishing his was back with Loki all of a sudden. Renka, on the other hand, felt her pulse racing with anticipation as she readied herself, no longer willing to let her feelings be held back by fear. With renewed determination and a drive to act, Renka closed the gap between her and the object of her affection, who was clearly uncomfortable with her change in attitude, but at this point she didn't care. Finally stopping just a few feet away, she promptly raised her hand up and pointed her finger literally just a few inches from Naruto's face, who actually flinched somewhat at the proximity. All the restaurant patrons were literally on the edge of their seats as they watched, some actually cramming food down their throats, as if at a movie theater. Hakubi was literally shaking, and all waited for the proclamation. Renka opened her mouth and prepared to make her declaration. Ring, ring. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I really am that much of a dick. Everyone literally felt their jaws hit the floor as Naruto's phone's familiar ring echoed throughout the restaurant, very familiar of the last instance. Hakubi felt compelled to slap his forehead at the poor timing, but felt a chill go up his spine when he saw the oppressive aura surrounding Renka. Naruto, of course, wasn't faring much better, though didn't say anything as his phone continued to ring. Though he didn't even have the chance to answer it, as Renka, with speed he'd never seen, all but ripped the device out of his pocket and opened it up. She then spoke very softly but in a menacing tone that pretty much read death. I'm sorry, Naruto's busy at the moment. Please don't call this number for the next several hours. Then without saying another word she hung the phone up and promptly ripped the battery out of it before flinging it into a nearby patron's soup, ensuring no further interruptions. Hakubi didn't know whether to chuckle or frown at the possible health violations but didn't say anything as he watched Renka. Naruto of course stayed quiet up to this point but finally decided to throw caution to the wind and ask what everyone else was thinking. So, Renka, is there something you want to talk about? His tone was hesitant, and a bit shaky, actually afraid of what would happen next. Renka slowly turned to him, her face shadowed yet her eye gleaming like a wild beast stalking its prey. Naruto immediately felt his heart beating like a wild drum as she closed in feeling fear and to an extent attraction to Renka's action, though he attributed that second part to life or death impulse. Regardless, Renka resumed her position and slowly raised her head to face him, Naruto's pulse growing ever faster, and the remaining patrons literally chewing into their seats. Finally the girl's gaze met Naruto's and surprisingly she didn't have a demonic look on her face, no, but a confident, exuberant one that actually caused Naruto's own heartbeat to increase, yet was noticeably vacant of any fear. Once again taking a deep breath, Renka promptly pointed her finger at Naruto and stated in a confident, booming voice for all the heavens to hear, Naruto Uzumaki, you and I are going to be going on a date this week. Her face then regained its normal smile and cheerful demeanor. Okay? There was immediately silence, so much so that one could almost say they heard the sound of Renka's rapidly beating heart and the air currently leaving Naruto's throat as he just stood there rooted in place, completely shell-shocked at what just happened. As expected, Hakubi, after getting over some surprise at Renka finally being able to do what she'd sworn she would, was now secretly doing backflips in his mind of her finally succeeding in taking the next step forward. Finally those two can actually take their relationship somewhere, that is if they can make it past the first date. Of course Hakubi quickly jumped away from his thoughts, and took note of how Renka and Naruto were still standing in oddly enough the same positions they were after the proclamation, though looking closely it was fairly obvious that Renka's face was getting much redder than it was a few seconds ago, and was about ready to burst. Naruto wasn't faring any better though, his eyes and face were pretty much blank, wind just blowing past his face without any reaction. His mind clearly unprepared for what just happened and unable to respond, and if one were to read his mind well, let's just say that when he first mistook Renka for asking him out with some surprise actually hearing those words for real, well. Inside Naruto's mind. Loud TV static. Thus it didn't take a genius to figure out that the blonde was too astounded by the action to give an intelligent response, which despite his growing maturity was understandable since again never been asked out by anything in his entire life, gender being moot. Of course Hakubi wasn't going to leave the poor boy hanging out to dry. Hence, with a little effort, Hakubi quickly walked over to Naruto and shook him just enough to shake him out of his daze. Naruto, Renka asked you out on a date. It's polite to respond, right? The shell-shocked blonde barely registered the words, though managing out a small nod in response. The somewhat questionable response, or yes, seemed enough for Renka, who awoke from her shock and quickly ran back into the kitchen before screaming in delight. Loud girlish scream. Some people quickly covered their ears, others looked on with satisfied smirks at the sight of said girl finally summoning the courage to ask the boy she liked out, and some watched in fascination as numerous glass cups shattered as a result of the ear-splitting sound of the girl's voice. Sadly, the sound itself seemingly wasn't loud enough to penetrate Naruto's own mind, currently still filled with the sound of his own mental static. Hakubi naturally tried his best to get another response out of him, but wasn't getting much of anything. Letting out a frustrated sigh, Hakubi rubbed his bald head in frustration. I knew the boy would be surprised, but I never would have imagined this would be his reaction. Ryu and Shokatsu, who were watching nearby, chuckled at the boy's dilemma. Guess the kid hasn't been on a date before, must not be used to the feeling quite yet. Certainly wasn't easy for me to the first time a girl asked me out. Shokatsu frowned slightly at his friend's comment and scoffed slightly. Ryu, a little girl asking if you'd like to share a chocolate cookie when you're 5 is not a date. The glasses-wearing waiter blushed in embarrassment at being called out, and quietly muttered under his breath, wasn't the first date I went on. Shokatsu merely shook his head in embarrassment at his friend's poor attempt to defend his honor, though he still walked up to Naruto, who was still frozen, and while reaching across to a pitcher of ice water on a nearby table before, without any kind of warning, dumping the water all over the blonde's head. The reaction pretty much was instantaneous, as the boy's originally shell-shocked eyes widened considerably while the water dripped down his face, and he himself let out a loud scream of his own. "Damn, that's cold." Shokatsu of course chuckled at the blonde's reaction, and continued to mockingly laugh at his coworker's distress, watching him shake the water out of his hair like a wet dog, while the others watched with some enjoyment, or a degree of surprise at the surprising tonal shift that took place in the short span of 3 seconds. Said humorous shift continued as Naruto, likely brought about by the sudden shock of being dosed in ice water, got right up in Shokatsu's face, dripping some degree of the water still on his face, dripping onto the cook's clothes. Of course he didn't seem bothered, too amused by his little act of amusement. Quietly wiping some of the water that managed to get on his glasses before calmly speaking into the blonde's face in a tone that clearly indicated he was milking the moment for all that it was worth. "Well, Naruto, are you finally back from your little romance trip?" Naruto frowned deeply at the cook's words, obviously feeling contempt for his clear amusement at his dilemma, but seemed to take it quite well at first, even putting his hand on his friend's shoulder in a friendly manner. "Actually, yes, Shokatsu, thanks for that. After all, what better way to wake someone up than with water in the face, right?" There was a brief pause before Naruto resumed his speech with a tone that made it obvious he had other intentions. "Oh, there's this." Faster than Shokatsu could blink, the cook suffered a serious blow to the gut, knocking the literal wind out of him. The blow, of course, wasn't very strong, as it was only meant for humor, but did cause the preverbal wind to be taken out of the boy's sails. Shokatsu obviously didn't look happy as he tried his best to glare threateningly at his attacker, but any intimidation he could have brought was neutralized by his pained face, which made him look like a goldfish gasping for air. "Ryu, do me a favor and kick his ass for me." The cook, having turned his attention to his partner, hoping he'd avenge him in some overdramatic fashion, only to have his hopes dashed when said partner turned his back to him while pretending to clean his glasses. "Sorry, man, but you kind of were asking for that when you dumped water on his head." Shokatsu quietly muttered out, "Traitor," while Hakubi quickly clapped his hands together to get their attention and tried to regain some sense of normality. "Alright everyone, time to get back to work. This has been fun, but it's time to get things back in order." Patrons quietly resumed their eating and dialogue while Rai and Shokatsu returned to their daily jobs. Naruto, of course, prepared to resume his duties, or at least considered it, before Hakubi placed a hand on his shoulder, quickly getting his attention. Looking at the master, the old bald man smiled lightly at him. "A moment, if you please, Naruto?" Quietly nodding, the pair slowly entered the master's office within the restaurant before Hakubi turned and smiled to the boy. "So Naruto, my boy, what did you think of Renka's little request? Not every day you get asked out by a beautiful girl, is it?" Said comment quickly caused the blonde to remember Renka's little declaration, which had briefly escaped from his mind, yet now had returned to his mind's point of focus. His face red again, he tried coughing lightly to cover up his obvious discomfort/embarrassment in the subject matter. "Well, you're right about the not being asked out every day part." Hakubi's eyebrows raised at the comment, or rather the obvious meaning it contained, which he could easily read like the pages in a book. "I take it you've not been on many dates in the past, have you, my boy?" Rather than respond or even gesture, the ex-ninja simply allowed his silence to say all that was needed, though the frown on his face was a helpful indicator. The old master now didn't know whether to smack himself in the head or laugh at this new development. This could defiantly complicate things. Guess Naruto isn't quite like Kensei after all, at least when it comes to dating. Truth be told, despite Kensei's less than desirable personality quirks and hobbies, as a young man he not only attracted a great deal of challengers hoping to gauge their skills, but also a number of female admirers, many of whom he'd taken on dates before, and was very skilled in the art. Hence he knew how to attempt things with Renka's mother, though that's not to say things weren't awkward or Kensei was flying blind. Of course, Naruto seemed like he was just as capable of attracting plenty of admirers and perfectly capable of going on at least a few outings with those of the opposite sex, if some of the glances he received from female patrons was any proof. Regardless, the master wasn't the least bit discouraged, just meant he needed a little coaching. So with a slight breath he calmly gestured Naruto to sit down, and console him in the manner of dating. Now, Naruto, there's nothing to be concerned about. If anything, you should be happy that Rinka asked you out. I mean, you like her, don't you? The blonde almost jumped at the question, and his race darkened a few shades while his mind flashed images of his very attractive friend whom he'd grown very close to over time, and could certainly tell he felt something for her that easily rose above mere friendship. I do like Rinka a lot. She's probably the closest friend I've made since I got here, and I might even say I like her more than as a friend. But dating? At the thought of it, the blonde's mind actually flashed back to a fantasy he once had about his longtime crush Sakura and how he simply wanted to go on a date with her. Nothing fancy or anything like that, simply him and her eating at Ichiraka ramen with a possible kiss near the end. Of course, now he found Rinka being put in the pink-haired girl's place. Of course, Naruto quickly remembered how epically he'd failed in trying to get her to go on a date with him, and while his lack of experience in this field didn't do much for his confidence, still he managed to respond to Hakubi's query. I'm not saying I don't like Rinka, Master Hakubi, I do. It's just, well, you've never been on a date with anyone before and you're completely in the dark about what course of action to take. Naruto's blue eyes widened while simply nodding in reply at Hakubi's accurate assumption, with the old master merely chuckling in response. The old master quietly stood up and walked towards the window of his office door, observing the patrons in the restaurant, specifically Rinka, who returned to her position. My boy, what you're feeling is perfectly understandable. A first date is always something that gives people cold feet, so there's nothing to worry about. With another smile, he quickly turned his head enough so Naruto could see his face. Also, between you and me, Rinka's never been on a date either, if you can believe it. Poor girl spent the majority of her time chasing her father. She's never really considered dating, and her headstrong attitude normally chases any potential hopefuls away. Hence, she's just as nervous, if not more, than you are. Quietly returning to his seat, the old master faced the teen and looked him straight in the eye. Naruto, I can't force you to make this decision, as it is ultimately one you must make yourself. That being said, you shouldn't be so afraid to move forward with this despite your lack of experience. Rinka is a wonderful girl, and I know you both care deeply for each other, thus you shouldn't let your reservations or lack of experience stop you from letting those feelings come to the surface. Naruto remained seated, Hakubi's words actually serving to quell some of the worry he'd been feeling and making him better come to realize his growing feelings for his blue-haired friend. Again, he wasn't saying he outright loved the girl, but he did like her more than as a friend and possibly wanted to see where said relationship would go. Hakubi offered him another reassuring look. My boy, everyone is afraid to be honest with their feelings, either because of rejection or simply the unknown. However, it isn't until later that they truly come to fear their inability to go back and try to make those feelings known, left to mourn what could have been. Don't let your fears hold you back, my boy, you'll only come to regret it. Like the sound of a bell resonating all throughout the wind, Naruto felt his heart swell with confidence at the old master's words, which Hakubi took in stride simply by the boy's expression. Taking a calming breath, Naruto quietly rose from his seat with renewed confidence. Thanks, Master Hakubi. Guess I was letting this whole date thing get the better of me. After all, I won't know how things work out until I try, right? The bald master nodded at the boy's response and smiled, as it was clear his work had finally paid off in the end. Though Naruto, despite his newly gained confidence, still had one final obstacle to overcome which didn't seem as easily resolvable. Master, any idea where I should take Rinka on this date? Hakubi at that point lost all composure due to the complete tonal shift, his bald head crashing against the hard floor. Guess I'm not quite finished here yet. Time shift, an hour later. Just what the heck are those two talking about in there? How long does it take Hakubi to give out any advice? I wonder if I might have come on a little too strong. Naruto's reaction wasn't what I'd been hoping for. Damn, I knew I should have at least practiced a little before actually asking him. The poor blue-haired girl felt the strong urge to take the serving plate she had in her hands and smack herself in the face with it at her own shortcomings in the dating world. True, as Hakubi stated, Rinka had never been on a date before, nor had she ever asked anyone on a date either, and her attempt to ask Naruto out may have been a bit strong. Of course, she tried to simply tackle the issue as she does everything else, with the Ma family patented force-first approach. Now she was slowly regretting said decision and had since been worrying like crazy about Naruto's eventual response to her date request, fearing rejection. Her worry was reflected in her actions as she was showing a lack of attention, actually pouring water on guests instead of in their glasses or almost tripping over her own feet. Yet she tried her best to push those worries out of her head until the final words came out of Naruto's mouth, and her actions would follow depending on said outcome. Which unfortunately for Renka suddenly came about as the sound of Hakubi's door opening alerted everyone to the action to come. Renka, however, felt her heart nearly burst out of her chest in fear. Sweat dripping down her brow like rain as she heard footsteps approach her coupled with the sounds or chair creaking as guests watched in anticipation. Finally the steps stopped and all became quiet, yet Renka refused to turn fearing what would come. Of course Hakubi picked up on this as the sound of his coughing caught her attention. Renka, if you would be so kind as to turn around, I believe Naruto has something to say to you. The poor girl's breath hitched as she now felt a sense of urgency, unable to stand still, yet her body slowly turned as if rusted metal, her mind unable to properly fathom what was to come. With some degree of nervous response, Renka felt compelled to close her eyes, but a small voice in her head screamed out, ordering her not to. Finally her green eyes met Naruto's blue, and for a brief moment it felt as if there was no one else in the whole room or even the world. Time seemed to slow down as the Bonita awaited the response. Her mind was so focused she didn't notice the nervous look on Naruto's face as well, nor Hakubi nudging him to press on. So with a slight gulp the blonde managed to regain his fox-like grin, and with some mirth in his voice stated very clearly, "So Renka, what time would you like to go out?" After those words had been uttered you could have heard the sound of a flea's leg hit the floor as everyone had gone silent. The patrons around the restaurant has various reactions ranging from dropped jaws, wide eyes, hearts in their eyes, soft gazes at the pair's progression, and some flat out were close to cheering. Hakubi of course was simply smiling, resisting the urge to give the two a thumbs up. Though Renka of course was having some serious trouble reacting as her mind literally went flat. Her brain had pretty much overloaded as those single words left the boy's mouth. Her face, however, oddly enough wasn't red for some reason, though that could easily be cropped up to her brain being unable to process the volume of emotion she felt. Still the brunette had enough mental energy to manage a weak nod before her mind went blank. Her body now frozen solid, with the only part of her moving being the bells in her hair letting off a small chim. Naruto and Hakubi sweat dropped slightly at her reaction as Naruto tried his best to shake her awake, with little success. Hakubi merely sighed at the poor girl's reaction, not quite what I expected, but all things considered it could have turned out a lot weirder. Regardless, those two have finally taken the first real step, and hopefully it leads to a path of happiness that will last. However, despite the rather joyous feelings going through both Naruto and Renka's minds, the blonde in question had another thought egging at him like a splinter that, while not truly painful, leaves a stinging sensation that never seems to leave you. Just hope Loki doesn't pull any crap. I might be able to keep an eye on Renka, but knowing him, he'll look for any way to piss me off. Hidden location, few minutes prior. Meanwhile, currently locked away in his hole, the aforementioned fourth fist was currently typing away on his computer with a smirk on his face. His recent action of releasing Fenrir had put him in a seriously good mood. Of course, now that he had his weapon back under his thumb, it was time to move things a little more forward. He'd already taken the first step during an earlier gathering with the fists where he hopped to plant some seeds of betrayal in Berserker. Despite him being the second fist, Loki was confident with his help the pair could easily overthrow Ragnarok, Fenrir being the extra insurance needed for said plan. Yet there was still a serious wrench in his plans. Fenrir unknowingly had slowly been influencing the other fists himself. While Odin and Berserker were as cold as ever, it was clear to Loki that Thor, Freya, Valkyrie and Siegfried had strangely become somewhat closer to each other since his arrival. This in turn meant the likelihood they'd turn against one another was slim at best. Hence the reason he'd come up with a new idea to fix this latest problem, and the program he was currently typing away on. Fenrir's interference might have caused a few problems, but I can still turn things in my favor, and wouldn't you know it, Shirahama's gonna end up helping me do it. Thanks to that little mishap with his sister, that moron is gonna be gung-ho determined to take Ragnarok down one fist at a time. Loki could read The Unfortunate Disciple like a children's book and knew he'd look for the easiest opening to gain an offensive stance on his enemy. That in turn would present the possibility to start knocking the currently joined fists apart, making it easier to usurp Odin. It was already showing signs, as Siegfried had apparently been showing signs of switching sides, muttering some nonsense about the group lacking the more boisterous melody of friendship he seemed to only find in Fenrir. It was in part for this reason that Loki had already made plans to deal with the next fist on his pre-verbal hit list, Thor. Of the remaining fists, Thor's loyalty was fairly strong, yet he was also a foolishly honorable individual, meaning it could easily be exploited to his ends. Of course, the real icing on the cake was his friendship with Fenrir, something that would his actions lead to potential pain upon the ninth fists, allowing him to further indulge in said warriors. It's amazing what a little information spoken out of word of mouth can do. Now I get to kill two birds with one stone and move my plans forward. Letting loose a sickening chuckle, the fourth fist quickly shifted his attention to another monitor labeled RM, currently showing the area just outside of Gekkerin where he could see some activity going on in the restaurant. His grin growing wider, Loki slowly turned his full attention to the screen. Might as well check in on Fenrir and his girlfriend to see how things are going. The fourth fist quickly typed on his keyboard and the camera zoomed in as close to the windows as he could. Loki, of course, wasn't cocky enough to even try to plant a camera in the actual restaurant, as he'd learned from Odin that high-ranking martial artists had crazy sensory abilities that would have made any hidden camera they would be able to find it without even trying to look. Thus his picture wasn't perfect, but he'd still sprung for high-quality equipment, so he was able to make out enough of the picture to clearly see Naruto and Renka near each other, both faces clearly red and activity brewing. Loki's teeth began to glimmer as his mouth stretched from ear to ear. Looks like I just hit pay dirt. Now just adjust the volume and clarity a bit. The noise from the inside that seemed like static gargle quickly became all clearer to him, and he quickly started chuckling as he managed to pick up on not only the whole confession but the information that followed afterwards, namely the pair's dating plans and location. In a matter of seconds, the chuckling fourth fist was spinning around his chair like a sugar-high 8-year-old. And everyone keeps saying that eavesdropping never pays off. Oh, this information's absolutely perfect, and the timing couldn't be better. He quickly turned to a nearby screen and typed in some information before a video image of one of his shadows popped up. Yes, Commander Loki, what is it? Listen, I want you to pass on some information to our other agents in the neighborhood regarding Thor's little underground fight group. The shadow raised an eyebrow at the request, confused at the request. But sir, is that really wise? After all, words spread, the Shinpaku Alliance is now looking for any kind of dirt they can dig up about Ragnarok, and it's likely that they'll attack at the drop of a hat. The fourth fist continued to smirk and chuckle as the gears in his head continued to turn and the image of his new scheme flowing through his mind. That's exactly what I'm hoping for. In fact, make sure that the information manages to reach that freak Najima. No way he'll such data go to waste. Sir, I still don't get it. What exactly are you hoping to accomplish by this? Loki's grin turned full-blown treacherous. His chuckling grew dark. Not much, just a little destruction amongst the ranks of Ragnarok? The shadow paused for a moment. What about Fenrir, sir? Aren't you worried he'll interfere? At that point, the fourth fist burst out laughing in a mirthful manner reminiscent of a psychopath slowly torturing his victim in as slow and painful a manner as possible. Oh, I don't think that'll be a problem. Let's just say I have a feeling he'll be preoccupied for a while. Choosing not to argue further, the shadow nodded and signed off, leaving his master to continue laughing before taking a brief glance back at the image on the camera at Gekkerin. He'd paused the image of Renka and Naruto smiling and blushing in each other's company, a moment that should have seemed both romantic and beautiful. Loki, however, only saw a means of further exploitation as he now felt his chain around Fenrir's collar grow tighter. After all, thanks to Fenrir's own actions, I've got more ammo on him now than ever. Wonder how long I can drag it out before he snaps. Guess we'll find out, won't we, Fenrir? Scene change, next day, around 7 o'clock park. Somehow I can't help but feel like we might be missing something here. No kidding, this isn't exactly what I imagined my first date would be like either, you know. Those were the words being spoken by the pair of Naruto and Renka, currently just walking through the local park, trying to make the most of their step into the dating world. or at least what would qualify as sort of a date. Yes, contrary to popular belief, the pair's first time out together was not something either extravagant like some dinner or even something as cliché as a movie. Due in partial part to their lack of experience with dating in general brought on by their unique social lives and duties, neither really had a lot of time to prepare anything special. Though the real roadblock was that despite their time together, neither really knew that much about each other. That is, Naruto knew only a little about Renka's background, almost none of her interests or likes, while Renka pretty much knew next to nothing about the blonde's own interests. Needless to say, that would make any normal date kind of awkward. Thankfully, before things could crash and burn before they began, Hakubi, once again bailing their respective asses out, recommended a simple walk through the park as an attempt to better connect with each other and see if they could effectively connect enough to move up to the more romantic areas of dating. So in effect you could call it more a practice date than an actual one, but really that was a matter of perspective. Naruto, of course, was pretty okay with the idea, mainly cause he didn't like the idea of flying into said experience blind and possibly screwing up. Renka, on the other hand, wasn't so happy, as after everything she went through to ask the blonde out was hoping for something a little more romantic than a stroll through the park. But Hakubi effectively shut her up and sent the pair off to work things out. The pair continued on for a few moments, with Renka musing over what course of action to take to at least make the night memorable or useful. Well, it might not be exactly what I was hoping for, but then again I mainly wanted to try and get Naruto to be more open with me. So maybe this could work in my favor, just need to be a little patient. In an attempt to break the silence, the brunette decided to try and break the ice and finally asked something to Naruto that had been bothering her for something. Say, Naruto, think I can ask you something? The blonde, who had up to that point been somewhat contemplating his own course of action, redirected his attention to Renka and nodded at the question without much of a verbal response. Well, I'm curious. I know you said this is the first time anyone's asked you out, but I can't help but wonder why that is exactly? The rather odd question caused the ninth fist to raise an eyebrow, as the question seemed rather out of nowhere. Any particular reason you're so interested? Renka again found herself recalling Naruto's mention of his godfather, and how it alluded to a possibly dark childhood, or at least tragic life, for her favorite blonde. While she didn't want to try and press the issue to where she'd potentially bring up more bad memories, her curiosity and desire to grow closer to the boy prompted her to peer into his past in other ways. Well, it's just I'm pretty surprised. I mean, so many of the girls at the restaurant ogle you all the time. Not to mention that little incident 2 days ago as well. What, did you just grow up in a place with no girls or something? Naruto found himself paling slightly at the girl's subtle mention of the beautiful Mio Furinji's rather affectionate reaction to him. Of course he was aware that said response was more childlike than actual affection, though Naruto had plenty of other reasons for ignoring said girl's advances. Somehow, Renka, I get the feeling Mio would probably be more likely to give me another taste of concrete before asking me out, especially if she learned I'm Fenrir. As for the other comment, he didn't know whether to chuckle or possibly frown, mainly considering the types of girls he was commonly surrounded with. I can promise you, Renka, there were plenty of girls in my hometown. Truth is, I just wasn't very popular at the time, and well, dating wasn't exactly high on my priority list anyway, so no big deal. His answer, however, didn't satisfy Renka, as he could tell he was still hiding something. Naruto might have been a serious, mature guy most of the time, but he was still a guy, a hormonal teenage guy. There was no way he could go 15 years without being interested in someone. So you're saying you never had a crush on anyone? The question made the blonde pause, as the familiar image of a certain pink-haired medical ninja popped up in his head, an image he'd practically had burned into his brain since he was young. The pause, of course, meant Renka had hit the nail on the head and now found herself totally invested in learning more, mainly to scope out possible competition. Alright, Naruto, spill. This girl you liked, what was she like? Come on, tell me? The blonde didn't want to respond at first, as while he would have somewhat liked to reminisce about his old life, said action could potentially make him long to return to his place of origin, which of course was out of the question. Though he knew Renka wouldn't just leave him alone, partially because she was naturally curious about his past and, as evident by her action of asking him out, clearly liked him and wanted to hopefully form a stronger bond with him. That in turn made him feel somewhat more compelled to speak, as while bringing up the past might have at times been painful, it allowed him to forge new strong ones with the people he'd come to hold dear now. So he chose to indulge her somewhat. Alright, fine. She was a girl from where I grew up. Her name was Sakura, and I had a crush on her for as long as I can remember. You could say I was a bit obsessed. Too bad she didn't reciprocate. Huh, she shot you down? At that point Naruto felt himself cringe slightly as he recalled the numerous manners in which his former crush had seen fit to reject his date propositions. If you consider punching me so many times that I wonder how I haven't suffered permanent brain damage, then yes, she shot me down a lot. Renka quickly found herself frowning as she tried to imagine this Sakura girl in her mind. Based on Naruto's tone, it was pretty obvious whatever feelings he had were likely destroyed along with the brain cells she must have killed with her acts of physical violence. Granted, Renka could be accused of the same act, but she did it typically in a more playful manner, and would only use a small amount of physical force. The way Naruto described this girl, however, made her sound like some hardcore psycho, which left her with the simple question. Okay, if this girl was as bad as you make her sound, then why the heck did you like her in the first place? Please don't tell me it was something stupid like she was really pretty, right? Renka's tone made her disbelief to the blonde clear, and it did somewhat raise the question that Naruto had secretly asked himself regarding his relationship with Sakura. Certainly she was beautiful, at least to him, but that hardly seemed like a consolation for all the abuse, the bad mouthing, and most of all the obvious signs she was only interested in Sasuke and not him. True, she'd become more accepting of him over the years and they'd become much closer, yet there was a part of him that keeps screaming out to him that how no matter his efforts she'd always love Sasuke and not him. So that left the question of why. Naruto found himself truly curious by this question and pondered the response, looking through his mind for a clear answer as he and Renka continued to walk. All the while his mind continued to show images of himself and Sakura together along with Sasuke, Kakashi, and all the others from his village. Renka watched as a small smile appeared on Naruto's face, though this wasn't the happy or boisterous smile she'd seen on him before. Rather, this was a somewhat sorrowful, mirthless grin brought on by some past happiness that had long since been lost. I guess you could say it started out as just a childhood crush, though she always only had eyes for another guy who later became a really good friend of mine. The two of them became some of the first real friends I ever had, and I treasured the bonds we shared more than anything else. Renka gave a small frown at that. How can you treasure the fact that your friend was your crush's crush while she ignored and hit you? She questioned. When you spend your whole life alone, you reach a point where you want someone to acknowledge and even hold your existence dear, that you'd be willing to endure any pain to keep that bond, if only to avoid that empty hell again. Renka almost felt herself shiver at how cold and empty the boy's voice was, obviously reflective of a lonely existence that she still had only grasped the surface of. So what was your other friend like? She asked, and felt her heart drop as the blonde of her affection's eyes gained a dark look, the temperature of the very air becoming bitterly cold. Let's just say we had a bit of a falling out. The blonde's eyes were as frozen as his tone, leading Renka to switch gears and topics, fast. Well, never mid that, ha ha ha. She laughed awkwardly. Oh, ice cream, she said, pointing to Naruto. Naruto blinked. What? He asked with a raised eyebrow. Renka blushed. Ice cream, you get that on dates, I think, she said. Wow, she really was completely clueless on what to do here. Maybe she should have read a romance book, or watched a few chick flick to better prepare herself. Note to self, chick flicks, need to know more about dating. Sure, Naruto said, wanting to move away from the less enjoyable parts of his past. Saw some guy selling ice cream in the distance. Be right back. What flavor do you want? He asked her. Renka smiled a pretty smile. Chocolate, she said, and he nodded as he walked away. With sprinkles, she added, and he nodded to this and continued walking. Oh, and a cherry on top, she added further, and blushed, and started to call herself childish for adding those things. Why can't this be simple? After a moment or two of berating herself on her maturity level, Renka waited as Naruto returned with the ice cream in hand. His face showed a clear neutrality of the current situation, as the memories from earlier still rung in his mind and were putting a damper on their evening. Naruto quickly handed Renka her frozen treat, though it took her a few moments to actually register it, as she tried her best not to make another misstep. Unfortunately, things didn't go as well. Renka, still in something of a half-aware state, managed to only grip part of the bottom of the cone with her hand, which due to the weight being at the top caused it to quickly tip over and the contents to spill, regrettably all over Naruto. Alarms immediately went off in Renka's mind as she started to panic. Oh crap. Great, as if things weren't bad enough, I had to go and spill the ice cream I begged him for all over him. Perfect, as if this night could get any worse. Naruto, of course, didn't seem to have put by the rather cold substance currently all over the lower part of his shirt and pants. Having made a great deal of messes at the restaurant on more than one occasion made this a minor problem. Don't worry about it, Renka. I got some napkins, so I'll just clean it off. However, Renka, in an attempt to try and reverse the damage already done, snatched the napkins from the blonde to clean off the ice cream herself. No way, Naruto. I was the klutz and I'll fix the problem, so just let me take care of this. Naruto again tried to protest, but Renka already was quickly trying to rub away the melted ice cream. Of course, Renka was still not completely thinking straight, and had unintentionally ended up going a little too far down to remove the ice cream. Naruto's eyes quickly widened at this development, and slowly felt himself panicking as he recalls similar instances occurring in the village with Sakura and what they typically led to. Hence he quickly tried to get the girl's attention. Renka, I think you might need to stop, like right now. His tone was clearly urgent, and thankfully enough to get the girl to finally regain her senses for a moment. What's the big deal, Naruto? I'm just trying to get the ice cream off. What, do you enjoy the idea of being covered in sticky goop? Naruto felt a cold sweat drip down his brow as he spoke. No, of course not. However, I feel that there are certain places where it'd be better if I did the cleaning. Renka raised an eyebrow at the comment, as it was clear there was a hidden message behind it, hence she decided to refocus her eyes on the area where her hand still remained and promptly solved the problem. End result was Renka's face going nova red as she saw her hand was dangerously close to a certain area of a male's body that, well, one shouldn't even be near on a first date. The poor girl honestly didn't know how to react, still frozen in place with an equally embarrassed Naruto standing perfectly still in front of her. Neither made an attempt to move from their spot, partially due to their shared mortification along with Renka's fear of increasing the level of discomfort, while Naruto was simply afraid of pissing the girl off. Naruto, of course, tried to remain calm in the situation and trying to figure out what step to take that wouldn't lead him to suffering any potential bodily harm. Okay, just calm down. Remember, Renka's nothing like Sakura and only gets physical when things get really embarrassing or I do something really stupid. Oh wait, that's exactly like Sakura. Crap. Okay, never mind. Maybe if I just take a step back and nothing else happens to push her over the edge. Oh my, can you believe those kids? Honestly, teenagers today are so bold it's shocking. Naruto immediately felt his spine tingle as his eyes slowly turned to the source of the sound. He caught sight of an older couple currently strolling through the park who'd caught sight of the pair, and as luck would have it were completely misinterpreting the current situation as something more devious than it actually was. While thankfully they were the only other people in the park at the moment, having anyone see two people in such a position was not something wanted to be advertised, and well, based on past experience, it never ended well for the blonde. As if the timing couldn't be any worse. Naruto immediately turned to look at Renka, only to gulp as she slowly stood up and her face obscured from view. Feeling a sense of dread wash over him, the frightened teen tensed his body in preparation for the pain that was sure to follow, yet it never came. Naruto watched with strange curiosity as Renka merely stood there, her face still hidden. Hopping to get a reaction out of her, he slowly reached over towards his would-be date to try and shake her up, only for him to notice a tear fall down her face. Eyes quickly widened as Renka finally looked up, showing her face red with embarrassment, yet not the angry embarrassment he'd seen in the past, but rather a sort of distraught embarrassed. The girl actually tried diverting her eyes, as if she was somewhat ashamed to look at him. Naturally, Naruto tried to reach out to her, but she pulled herself away somewhat, leading Naruto respond, "Hey Renka, what's the matter? I was half expecting you to knock me flat on ass and instead you look like you're gonna cry. What's up?" Renka did her best to try and meet the boy's eyes, but it was obvious she had some difficulty, but managed to muster out a few words. "This was the first date I've ever been on, and I really wanted it to at least be a memorable one. Yet nothing seemed to go right up to this point, and all I've managed to do is bring up some unpleasant memories from your past, cover you in ice cream, and then..." She tried again to hide her face as she recalled the most recent escapade. I wanted to make this a fun night for us both because I really do like you, Naruto, and after everything I had to go through to ask you out, the least I could hope for was for things to go right. Maybe we should just call it off and go. The girl was at first met with silence, and she feared the implications it carried, half expecting Naruto to agree with her and leave. However, what she wasn't expecting was for him to lightly chuckle, which at first glance would have been taken as an insult towards her words, but something kept her from thinking otherwise. Naruto was actually smiling somewhat with the grin he'd had the day before, one that showed more emotion than she'd seen in him before, which only seemed to make her heart flutter. However, she still felt some degree of insult and pouted at the laughter. "Thanks a lot, you jerk. I'm so happy my humiliation amuses you so." Naturally, she only slightly meant what she was saying, but there was a small part of her that did feel hurt by the laughter and wanted an answer. Naruto managed to stop chuckling and looked at Renka with that same smile. "You think that after a few little missteps we should end this? Compared to most of the girls in my life, spilling ice cream on me is hardly anything painful. Even if things went totally wrong, I still would have seen things through." Any embarrassment Renka was feeling quickly melted away, and her ears perked as she found herself growing more elated as the blonde spoke, her hope restored. "When you asked me out, in your own unique way, I honestly didn't have any idea how to respond. Based on my own track record of no success, I really didn't think it would happen, especially from a girl like you, Renka." The poor girl's blush returned, though in a more pleasant fashion this time, at her crush clearly acknowledging his enjoyment of her company. Naruto actually rubbing the back of his head in embarrassment for some reason. "Honestly, I really like you too, Renka, though admittedly I'm still a little new to this whole dating thing myself and frankly trying to wrap my head around it. However, what I do know is if a little ice cream spilling and a few awkward moments are all I have to deal with to keep this going, then there's nothing to worry about." The blonde ex-ninja then offered his hand like a gentleman to the red-faced girl. "So Renka, wanna finish our date, and hopefully have another one in the foreseeable future?" Renka found herself frozen in place, and didn't know what to do, looking up the hand as if it were the door to Nirvana just waiting to be opened. Slowly and unconsciously her hand started to move towards Naruto's and brushed against it. "Ah!" Renka squeaked, much to her embarrassment. Naruto said as he felt her hand brush against his own face blushing somewhat, as despite his confidence he himself had never actually held hands with a girl before, and his confidence from before was momentarily having been halted by the skin contact. If you want to?" he asked, and Renka gave a shaky nod, not trusting her mouth. They clumsily grasped each other's hand and settled into a comfortable position with Naruto's hand on the bottom and Renka's on top. The silence was really becoming unbearable, but to Renka, she kinda liked it since she was holding Naruto's hand. It was rough with calluses, firm, but soft in some way at the same time. It almost told the story of his character, and how hard he had trained to get where he was today. A story she hoped to hear one day. While the date had started rather rocky and awkwardly, once the pair had managed to settle some of the anxiety they'd been feeling, things slowly started to work themselves out. Naruto actually managed to get Renka to share some more about herself, primarily about her family and past experiences in China. Renka meanwhile finally learned a little more about the more interesting aspects of Naruto's life, primarily that he himself was originally an infamous prankster in his village, notorious for wearing blindingly orange clothing. The mention of which got a rousing bout of laughter from the girl, unable to imagine normally calm and serious Naruto, who seemed more drawn to dark clothing, actually act in such a childish manner. Eventually the pair chose to stop on a park bench for a few moments just to take in some of the scenery before planning on heading back to the restaurant. Renka found herself positively elated, all signs of her previously distraught self gone. Despite some rocky moments, things were turning out better than she'd hoped, and she finally felt genuinely close to her crush, who, at least based on their time together, returned her feelings to an extent. Though the young kung fu user felt compelled to make one more bold move and rested her head on Naruto's shoulder. She quickly felt him stiffen and internally panic at possibly moving too soon. Thankfully, he quickly relaxed and slumped his shoulder to give her a more comfortable position. Inwardly, Renka was doing back flips at this progress she was making. Naruto himself was also happy at the experience, despite somewhat being blindsided by it, enjoying the warm presence of the girl on his shoulder, silently smiling to himself. Who thought that after all the crap I've had to go through, I find myself on a date with a girl like Renka? Guess things work out pretty unexpectedly, though I'm not complaining so long as nothing happens to. Ring ring. Ruin it. The peaceful night silence was abruptly ended by the loud sound of that all-familiar cell phone ring. Naruto found himself sweating somewhat as he saw Renka look up at him with narrowed eyes, having thought they'd be rid of the thing. Naruto, wanting to avoid any possible emotional outbursts, quickly offered him a look that said, "I'll take care of this quickly," before looking at the caller ID and saw it was Thor. He quickly offered a "sorry, really sorry" apology to his date before moving a few feet away to speak with his cohort. "Thor, whatever this is, can it wait, please?" he hissed hastily into the phone. "Greetings, my friend, I was going to ask you something, but is something wrong?" Thor asked. Naruto pinched the bridge of his nose at his friend's question, trying to avoid screaming at him for his poor timing. Yes, there is. I'm kinda on a date now, which was just starting to pick up after a few mishaps, and your call's not helping with the mood?" "Ah, I see. Perfectly understandable, my friend. I, who has not had the chance for romance, sadly, understand. In that case, I will call back later. Nothing is more important than romance, and I will not let myself ruin yours. So please enjoy yourself, and I'm rooting for you," Thor said, though his tone and lack of explanation for his call's purpose unsettled the ninth fist somewhat. "Thanks, man, see ya," Naruto said as he hung up the phone and turned to see Renka in his face. "Who was that?" she asked with narrowed eyes. Naruto started to sweat. Just a friend that wanted to give me some last-minute tips for our date, but I told him I was on it, and he apologized for interrupting it," Naruto lied smoothly. "I see," Renka said and grabbed Naruto's arm. "Well, come on, I want to walk around a little more before heading back," she said, and forced Naruto to walk at her pace. Naruto, of course, continued to smile at the girl, pulling his arm, trying to enjoy the experience further, but couldn't help this feeling itching at the back of his mind. Hope whatever Thor was calling about wasn't too important. Scene change, Thor's location. The Seven Fist hung up his cell phone quietly. "Good luck, my friend. If anyone deserves to have a little romance in his life, it's you. After all, I should be able to handle things myself." The massive sumo quietly turned inside his massive arena, now face to face with Kenichi Shirahama and the bulk of the Shinpaku alliance. Quickly tossing aside his cell phone, the thunderous warrior prepared himself for a fight with his aura burning bright. "Sorry about that, I had to make a quick call." As he spoke, his voice grew more thunderous as he prepared to make his stand against his opponent. "Now, Shinpaku Alliance, let's see how well you match against the power of a sumo. Make family connections. Hee, come on you guys, just a few more blocks and we'll reach Thor's arena, and then we'll show them the fury of the Shinpaku Alliance." Shinpaku. The sounds of Nejima's boisterous and loyal supports rang through the night air, and were only matched by the equally loud groaning of the group's supposed commanders. Kenichi walked alongside Takeda and Yukita, both of whom didn't seem all that enthusiased by their comrades' banter or cheering. "Geez, how'd we let that alien freak rope us into this crap? Isn't walking right into a Ragnarok base just begging for trouble?" Yukita, despite being the biggest of the group, was voicing the most concerns that were held by the others. Takeda, of course, didn't share his friend's fears and just kept his normal confidence. "Relax, Yukita, it's not like just the three of us are fighting after all. Not to mention our little spy master said he has a plan for dealing with Thor, so there's nothing to worry about." His words didn't seem to fully reach his friend and seemed like he needed more coaxing. "Look, if all goes bad, then we'll just use Nejima as a human shield." The sunglasses-wearing judo fighter perked up and even got into the spirit of chanting along with the others. Takeda smirked at his friend's renewed enthusiasm but paused when he saw Kenichi falling behind with a puzzled look on his face. "Yo, Kenichi, everything okay, man?" The disciple quickly exited his daydream-like state and turned his attention to his boxing ally. Yeah, I'm fine, Takeda, just something on my mind is all." Curious, the boxer decided to inquire, "And what's got you so baffled?" Kensei then asked in one simple question, "Where exactly does Nejima manage to dig all this info up from?" I mean, I know he says he has a spy network, but how could he get so much info on someone like Thor? Before Takeda could answer, Kenichi quickly found Naijima near his face with a sinister smile present. Let's just say, I've got a cousin who's a master when it comes to information retrieval. Scene change. Looks like I got an email from Harino. Hey, I guess the information I lent him came in handy after all. The individual in the shadows paused for a moment before breaking out into a massive fanged grin when he read the email completely, and saw his cousin's plan. Keek. Facing Ragnarok, huh? Deep breath. Rip their heads off. YHHA. Chapter 15. How the hell did I end up in this situation? Thor found himself cringing slightly as he stood outside of the main warehouse that served as Ragnarok's base of operations. Typically, the building didn't have much significance to the Seventh Fist, as it was just a place for him and the other fists to gather, nothing more. Today, however, its visage seemed reminiscent of the fiery gates of Tartaros or Hell if one wanted to keep to the group's focus on Norse mythology. Though this feeling wasn't brought about by some change the building itself had undertaken, rather it was more alkaline to what Thor knew was awaiting him upon his arrival, namely pain and punishment. The massive sumo actually found himself questioning his own masculinity at his inability to enter the building, though said feeling was overshadowed by the shame and anger he felt towards himself, which was causing him so much trouble now. Things had certainly taken an unexpected turn for the worse, depending on your point of view, for the Seventh Fist, and he had one Kenichi Shirahama to thank for it. Not long after he'd made his call to enlist the aid of fellow Fist, Fenrir, Thor was all but immediately challenged to a one-on-one match with the co-leader of the Shinpaku Alliance. By all intents and purposes, Thor could have easily rejected the offer and simply had him along with his squad of roughly 20 to 30 guys take out the small 7-man group that was the Alliance. Sure, they had Kenichi and the two traitors Takeda and Yukita. However, 7 against 30, including himself, there was no way in hell they stood a chance. However, if there was one thing Thor loved more than anything, it was getting to use his sumo skills in a fight. Hell, that was the main reason he joined Ragnarok in the first place. Plus, this was his chance to fight against the guy who'd been giving the gang so much grief over the last couple of months. As far as he was concerned, it was a win-win situation with no strings attached. Things really only started to get questionable, however, when Shirahama proposed a wager. Namely that if he was able to beat Thor, which anyone with eyes could see was highly unlikely, that Thor would quit Ragnarok for good. Said stake actually caused Thor to hesitate at first. True enough, he originally had no real love for the gang or its members, save Siege Fried, yet once Fenrir had joined, he actually found himself growing somewhat closer to some of the other fists. He and Valkyrie had found themselves sparring every now and again to review what the Ninth Fist had instructed her on, and despite some of her less than flattering weight-based comments, the two got along fairly well. Likewise, he actually had managed to hold down a conversation with Freya every now and again, thanks in part to his growing friendship with Valkyrie. Interestingly enough, Thor even considered trying to at least talk to her at once, but the Sixth Fist was always missing, so he never really got the chance to. True enough, the other fists like Odin, Berserker, and most of all Loki, were either too antisocial or flat-out colossal assholes that he didn't even bother with them. The fact of the matter was that Thor actually had something to lose should Kenichi defeat him beyond his position in the gang. Still, Thor also realized that this granted him an opportunity, namely to finally end Kenichi's interference with Ragnarok's affairs and ensure he never caused them trouble again. And on a slightly more selfish note, Thor also intended to all but force the young disciple to take up sumo as well. Thus he agreed to the wager, and at first it seemed like he couldn't lose. Kenichi's skill level was to a degree higher than he originally envisioned, incorporating elements from different fighting techniques and styles. However, due to Thor's massive frame and superior physical strength, the sumo was given a massive edge against the brown-haired former coward. However, that in turn led the Seventh Fist to ultimately become a little cocky, opting to drag the fight out and brag about his own unique sumo style instead of just crushing his opponent outright. His faith in his size advantage was ultimately turned against him as Kenichi managed to essentially throw the laws of physics and human anatomy out the window when he actually managed to lift the massive 300-pound, possibly more, warrior up at least 10 feet into the air and out of the ring. Had he not been so shell-shocked something like that could happen, he would have been more impressed by the boy's show of physical strength. Granted, he could have easily just said screw the bet and attacked Kenichi right then and there. However, once again, the boy, or rather his creepy little alien friend, did their homework. If there was one thing Thor valued, it was his honor, meaning he would never under any circumstances break a sumo's vow. Thus he intended to go through with his resignation, somewhat hoping his now former comrades in arms would understand enough to let him just leave with a slap on the wrist. Oh, if only it was that easy. Therein leading to the current situation, as the seventh fist now stood mere footsteps away from a seriously brutal exchange. Yet he knew he couldn't avoid it, as his pride as a sumo wouldn't allow him to stay silent about something so serious, though that didn't make what he was about to do any easier or more enjoyable. He silently released a sigh at his situation, yet remained brave in the face of his adversity. As a last act of preparation, the former seventh fist tightened the belt on his uniform, a preemptive ritual he'd often indulge in before entering the ring to his next bout. 'Twas a bit of a pity that things were going to end the way they were, especially considering he never did get a chance to properly duke it out with Fenrir up to this point. Oh well, no turning back now. So with his head held high, the sumo pushed open the doors with his massive hands and made his way into the warehouse, unaware that a pair of eyes above a sinister grin were watching him through the darkness. Hee hee, well, phase 1 is complete. Now all that's left to do is weigh my options. Should I milk this one moment for all it's worth, further build the distrust I've already sown within the ranks? Or option 2, use this little tidbit of information like a rolled-up newspaper and strike my little dog until he's ready to bite? Oh, there's so much potential, I don't think I can stand it. It was fairly obvious that the figure in the shadows was Loki, the fourth fist, making his way out of the shadows, phone in hand. With a quick flick, he opened the phone and typed in a quick 5-digit code, and in an instant, a picture on the screen revealed the image of Valkyrie, Freya, and Berserker in the room of floor above. Loki's smirk grew wide at the sight, actually forcing himself not to laugh, amazing what close to $1,000 worth of spy equipment and a little know-how can do. The fourth fist's smirk grew wider at the sight of Thor entering the room, gaining the attention of the other fists. He was quick to note of Valkyrie and, to a lesser extent, Freya giving him a fairly warm welcome. The lack of sound annoyed him slightly. Now I'm really starting to regret not springing for the audio feature, the one time I decide to be frugal, and it bites me in the ass. Then again, who really cares? This is more entertaining than watching cable. All I need is some popcorn. Watching continually with sick glee, his glass-covered eyes focused zeroed in on Thor's mouth, eagerly awaiting the moment the sumo dropped the proverbial bomb. Granted, Loki really couldn't give less of a shit about the sumo if someone paid him to. The guy was too loud and, frankly, too simple-minded with his whole sumo honor crap. Though it certainly proved to be valuable assets in his plan, and it worked better than he could have ever hoped. Loki actually felt himself become increasingly excited as he watched Thor take his Ragnarok gloves, something he'd held close as a source of pride, and toss them to the ground in front of the other fists before slamming his fist on his chest, obviously saying something relating again to his sumo pride. Loki barely managed out a chuckle before his eyes got considerably wider at the presence of a shadow behind the massive X-fist. The fourth fist watched with bated breath, like watching the climax of a high-priced film, as the final act of this little performance drew near. His eyes watched every last muscle movement as Thor, sensing the presence behind him, turned slowly, his own gaze meeting the eyes of Odin, who was looking upon the X-seventh fist with a look of sheer disappointment. Loki's anxiousness grew as he awaited the final act to his excitement. And it came, fast and hard. Beyond what his eyes could follow, Odin struck his ex-comrade hard in his massive frame. The blows actually left indents in the sumo's thick hide, lifting him off the ground several feet in the air for a matter of 3 to 4 seconds before he hit the ground with a solid thud. A small cough of blood and anguish escaped his lips upon his impact. Loki had to cover his mouth to keep from squealing in pure delight at the spectacle before him. Truly it was a scene he'd been hoping for and paid off in full. Yet the true prize was the genuine look of shock on Valkyrie's face and the mild facial reaction from Freya. Loki had been all too aware of the growing bond between the other fists, and knew that it would become problematic if not dealt with. After all, if they got too chummy, they could have easily banded together to not only throw a wrench into his plan, but also give him a massive ass kicking the likes of which he'd never seen or felt before, so it was satisfying to see that problem quickly subside. The looks on their faces pretty much spoke it all. His grin growing ever more, he turned his attention to the building itself. He shut his phone, returning it to the confines of his pocket along with his hands, and then casually strolled towards the scene he'd just witnessed. With another dark chuckle and a borderline sadistic look on his face, the fourth fist eagerly made his way through the doorway. Might as well get in on the fun. After all, can't have the others think I'm not a team player, right? Loki's laughter grew in volume as he made his way up the stairs, the only other sound being heard were the violent lashing sounds of fists and feet colliding with flesh, whilst grunts of pain followed each blow like the strike of a piano key. Truly, it seemed as though all the pieces were falling to place for Loki's plan to succeed, at least at first glance. For the fourth fist, regrettably, along with all those present in the immediate area, remained blissfully unaware of another pair of eyes currently locked upon the building. The calm yet almost bored smile on the wearer's face was worn as said wearer looked upon the gang's base, able to easily see everything that was going on with hawk-like precision. So this is the group that Ogata's been helping to form all this time. Not a bad bunch, I suppose, at least for a bunch of people who don't know what it means to reach to the skies. He spoke the last words with a slight scoff in his voice, yet still maintained a strangely mirthful tone that made his comments seem almost pleasant despite the obvious insult. The stranger quietly stood up from his position as he took another glance through the window with his keen sight, actually holding his hand above his eyes to block out the light as he was trying to get a better view. Taking a slight glance at a photo in his other hand, he gave one final scan of the room before letting out a sigh. Figures. Travel all those hundreds of miles across the ocean, and the guy I'm looking for isn't even around. His disappointment, though, only lasted for a minute, at which he turned his attention to the city behind him, taking in a deep breath as he looked upon the endless sea that was the heavens above. Guess I shouldn't be complaining. After all, it gives me an excuse to stretch my wings while I scan the city for him. Should be fun. And with that, the stranger vanished into the wind, flowing towards the city, whilst one person was currently unaware that he was being hunted, but for what purpose he would have to learn soon. Scene change, unknown location. The sound of footsteps resounded down a long narrow hallway as a familiar face made his way through the otherwise empty room, his normally jovial face marred with the look of annoyance and slight frustration. He'd better have a damn good explanation for this, or so help me. The words were spoken with a heavy taste of bitterness, as the man in question quickly made his way to a rather large double door. His pace was quick, not even slowing by a single step despite closing the gap between the doors as he drew closer and closer to his target. Naturally, one would expect any sane person to stop briefly before opening a door, especially a rather large and heavy-looking set of double doors seemingly made of solid iron. Sadly, the man in question didn't even attempt to slow down as he quickly grew closer until he was merely 3 feet away. Without even blinking, the man leaped a few feet in the air before raising his right leg up to about his chin before unleashing a powerful front thrust kick. The assaulting limb was actually embedding his foot into the door before the sheet of thick iron caved inwards and was knocked off its hinges. The piece of iron was sent like a bullet into the room, sadly heading directly for a person currently seated in the room's center at a simply wooden desk, eyes directed on some form of paperwork. The seemingly would-be assassin made no attempt to warn the man of the oncoming projectile. The oversized projectile seemed like it would assuredly collide with the man. However, in an instance that seemed all but invisible to the eyes, the seated man managed to move his hand out from behind the desk and catch the projectile with the simplest of ease, holding it in the air as if it were mere paper. His fingers dug deeply into the seemingly unbending iron, leaving deep impressions whilst the man's attentions remained glued to his work, actually acting as if none of the preceding events occurred. Without so much as a word, the man at the desk quietly set the papers he was reading down. Tension would have been felt heavily in the air surrounding the two, though he never released the iron door clenched in his hand. Quietly, he raised his head to look at the man who dared to attack him. His piercing eyes were hidden behind a pair of sunglasses, which had lenses in the shape of triangles, yet the gaze could be felt by any who would be found in said room. The two stared at each other for several seconds before the seated man spoke in a cold and calm voice. "And to what do I have the pleasure of addressing your present soul? Was said matter of such importance that you felt it necessary to tear my door from its hinges?" He tossed the door in hand a few feet before him for emphasis on the actions of the now addressed sun god, who was looking at the man with his harsh gaze, yet he remained unaffected. "You know very well exactly why I'm here, Akira. Even though I know you and I have never exactly been able to see eye to eye on things, I thought we at least had enough mutual respect between each other that we wouldn't be willing to go behind the other's back, particularly when it came to our disciples." The now named Akira simply continued to stare at the Capiria master, his expression completely frozen in place without a single hint of a reaction, unaffected by the man's words. "And by that you mean what exactly? I thought I made it clear when you first returned that I had absolutely no interest in your disciple's soul." Even though his tone contained no hint of falsehood, Soul didn't seem to accept the response, actually becoming more annoyed by the man's lack of interest. "I was referring to your pupil Akira. I made it very clear to you and the other Fists of Shadow to keep themselves and their students away from mine until I said otherwise." He paused for a moment before continuing. "And yet I learned not long after that a certain karate master's little would-be assassin just happened to hear about my disciple currently staying in Japan, and then decided to go on a little joy ride to see how well he flies." Akira actually raised his eyebrow a centimeter at the sight of Soul using air quotes to emphasize the last part of his sentence before crossing his arms under his chin. "So the matter in question pertains not to me, but rather my disciple? I fail to see how his decisions can be considered an act of betrayal on my part." The Capirian master all but growled at the man's lack of emotion and seriousness in his response, actually stomping his foot deep into the hard stone floor. "As the boy's master, it's your duty to monitor his actions to ensure he doesn't do something stupid, or in the case of attacking my student, give me some kind of warning or tell him not to go." His fury remained mild though his foot continued to dig deeper into the black stone floor, massive cracks growing from all sides like a spider's web. "And the fact that it's your disciple above all things is what makes it the most unbelievable. If it were Alexander, Ogata, or especially that bastard Silcardo, I would believe it. You, however, are the last person whose own student I would have expected this kind of stunt from. That is what makes me so angry and why I feel you went behind my back, Akira." There was a brief moment of silence between the two, yet Soul's heated glare remained. With the briefest sigh, the karate master of Yami quietly stood up from his desk, standing his full height, arms crossed behind his back. He quietly stepped several steps away from his desk, his gaze never leaving the angry Capiria master. "Your anger is not unwarranted. Given how long it's taken you to find an individual you consider worthy to teach, I imagine you'd like to avoid him suffering as much damage as possible. Especially with what happened between him and Sujetsu not too long ago." Soul again narrowed his eyes at the manner in which Akira described his relationship to Naruto. Made it almost sound like he viewed the boy as a simple project, or a pawn that could easily be replaced, a viewpoint that sadly many of his comrades held. Though he wasn't wrong about him being somewhat overprotective, of course, considering the boy's previous experience with the drunken master, it was perfectly understandable. Akira kept his back turned to Soul, his attention still focused on him. "However, though, one thing you've forgotten, Soul, is that it's been well over a decade since we last saw you. Things have long since changed since then, and you are still in the dark about certain matters." His tone, despite the implications, was obviously not meant to insult the master, but rather give him a subtle message hidden within the words, which he easily picked up on. "You concerning the members of YOMI, well, I'd be lying if I said I was well read on about yours or the other students." The Sun Master actually scratched his head and turned his face slightly, embarrassed at his lack of intel. "Honestly, I figured if I was going to keep you guys in the dark about my disciple until the time came, the least I could do was offer the same courtesy." "Exactly my point," Akira spoke firmly, finally turning to face Soul eye to eye, "and it's for that reason you shouldn't be so quick to assume I can easily reign over my disciple's actions." His tone when referring to his disciple was almost described as containing a slight hint of exhaustion in his voice, something Soul figured was impossible. It actually made him subtract some of his previous aggression towards his comrade, though just a little. I take it he's quite a handful then. Akira merely responded by pinching the bridge of his nose while huffing out slightly. So you have no idea. While he's loyal to a fault and follows my orders without question, when he's given time to himself or decides to do things his own way, he tends to be passionately straightforward. Soul just stared at Akira, his eyebrow raising as he tried to process the somewhat cryptic message given to him, though it didn't take long to figure it out. So basically, when he doesn't have any type of business relating to YMI, he basically. Akira just nodded. Once he sets his sights on something of interest to him, nothing short of my direct orders will pull him away from whatever prey he's chasing. Soul actually felt his shoulders slouch slightly, now better aware of the situation. Not that it did him much good, as it was fairly obvious that nothing he did was going to keep this kid and Naruto from running into each other, if what Akira said was any indication. Letting out a slight sigh, he decided to make one last question concerning his student's next opponent. So this student of yours, I heard he's something of a protege. His name, what was it? Akira quietly sat in his seat. His name is Shokano, and you are correct. In many respects he is the epitome of perfection in regards to the martial arts. His skills and abilities are eclipsed by none of those residing within YMI, and was personally chosen to the successor of the One Fist, Nine Shadow, having been personally taught by each of us in our respective styles, except yours of course. Soul quietly digests what he'd been told, and despite his best efforts couldn't help but shake uneasiness which gathered in the pit of his stomach. True, he trained Naruto well up to this point, and even if he'd never met this disciple of Akira's, he figured the kid wasn't stupid enough to try anything too extreme. After all, Akira knew what Soul was capable of and the consequences should he or his disciple cross him. Still, it was bad enough to simply face a member of YMI, but one who was trained by all the masters save himself. Well, looks like Naruto's about to be getting his next lesson in combat. Wonder how well he'll manage against this opponent. Scene change. Gekkarin. A loud sneeze rung throughout the bustling restaurant, coupled with the sounds of various plates striking against each other, as if being juggled in the air. Thankfully, they weren't accompanied by the sounds of loud crashes, bits of shards ringing as they collide with the ground and fly in every direction. Instead, the sight was merely of Naruto trying his best to keep at least 20 dirty plates stacked on top of each other in each hand, a nervous sweat dropping from his brow while a faint trail of snot dripped from his nose. Defiantly not the most flattering expression to have on one's face, especially in the company of others. Hope whoever is talking about me at least has something good to say. Bad enough I almost break all the dishes, don't need someone bad-mouthing me and God knows where to boot. The blonde quickly headed back to the kitchen with the plates, setting them down so as to avoid another potential hazard. Unfortunately, in his rush, he failed to realize that there was another hazard in the kitchen that he would most likely end up facing, far worse than broken dishes, Shokatsu's after-date comments. That was pretty impressive out there, Naruto. Tell me, were you as quick on your feet during your date with Renka, or did you just continue onward and make a complete ass out of yourself? The blonde felt the need to keep a forced smile on his face at the comment. Hakubi pretty much ordering no more violence in the establishment, not after all the brawls Naruto had been in and the property damage he racked up. Least I can get a date with an actual girl. Last I checked, the closest female anything you've touched in the last year are the chickens. He managed to state the comment with a straight face and tone, subtly mocking the cook's obvious inability to have any kind of contact with a woman. Shokatsu actually slammed down the knife he was holding so hard it cut through the board at the blonde's retort, doing his best not to toss it at his coworker or further damage the kitchen equipment. Granted, he was a lot more frustrated not at the comment itself, but rather how accurately it described his dating life, or lack thereof. True, he was a great cook and an even better marital artist, but in terms of skill in the art of dating, let's just say he came up pretty short. He was slowly beginning to feel tempted to just kick the blonde in the face for reminding him of such a thing. Thankfully, Ryu managed to make his way in to defuse the situation, by smacking the both of them upside the head. I can't leave you two alone with each other for more than a few seconds with issuing each other mental death threats, can I? The question was of course rhetorical, but yet the glare the two were sharing with each other essentially signified he was right. Not wanting another conflict to break out, Ryu quickly shoved a blank set of order sheets and a pen in Naruto's hand before pointing back to the main dining area. Look, put your plans aside for now, Naruto. We've got a lot of customers out there, and I need you to take some of the orders. Start with table 5. He then turned his attention to the still glaring Shukatsu. And if you've got the time to glare, then you've got time to do your job. Get back to cooking already. Grumbling at being ordered, the cook slowly returned to his work while Naruto made his way out to continue his task. Though not before almost bumping into Renka, moving rather briskly with an obvious frown on her face. The young girl seemed clearly frustrated and annoyed by something, and the blonde felt compelled to ask, having stopped moving, but the sound of Ryu clearing his throat pretty much signaled the blonde to get his job done. Granted, he did offer him a slight glance, indicating he'd see what the problem was. With a half-hearted nod, the ex-ninja resumed his work while Ryu turned his attention to Renka, who practically slammed several of her order slips next to Shukatsu, actually causing the cook to jerk back like a frightened deer. The action caused Ryu's eyebrow to shoot up rather quickly and compelled him to take action before he'd find himself stopping one conflict only to get caught up in another. So Renka, any particular reason you're abusing the paper and scaring Shukatsu out of his apron, or are you just having a moment? The comment was meant simply to break the ice, but Ryu immediately regretted his comment as he quickly had to jerk his neck back almost 7 inches to avoid a backhand to the face. Renka, having almost assaulted her coworker, clearly didn't look the least bit happy, huffing rather angrily with her fists shaking and veins forming on her face. It was fairly obvious she was pissed about something and was on a hair trigger, which, for someone with her skills, was not healthy for anyone in the immediate area. Though Ryu still figured he had to try, mainly because Renka still had a job to do. Her attitude problems be damned. Of course he tried to be a bit more delicate, and by that, it meant being a complete wuss, since an angry Renka could easily kick his ass. Everything okay there, Renka? You seem a little bit upset. The black-haired kung fu user chose his words wisely and silently gulped whilst awaiting her response, partially preparing himself to counter her next potential anger-induced attack. Said action seemed well merited as the girl in question slowly raised her still shaking right fist, clearly preparing for some kind of motion. She also seemed somewhat blind to Ryu, who was silently digging his heels in, bracing himself for what was surely to come. However, the blow itself never came to him, Renka opting instead to simply grabbing her head with both hands and pulling her hair slightly in severe frustration, clearly holding back a scream. The action was fairly short, and seemed like pretty much the girl was venting, but Ryu still opted to keep his guard up in case of a backlash. Eventually the hair-pulling phase subsided and Renka finally seemed to calm down, at least to where she wasn't shaking and didn't seem ready to kill the next thing that moved. Thankfully, Renka quickly put that feeling at ease by offering Ryu a somewhat calm, apologetic smile to her coworker, though it was still obviously somewhat strained. Sorry about the little freak-out, Ryu. Didn't mean to scare you and Shukatsu so badly. Both Ryu and Shukatsu actually cringed at being somewhat called out on being afraid of a girl who was a few years younger than they were. Granted, it was 100% true the two were close to pissing themselves, but they still had their pride as men to defend, which led to Ryu coughing lightly as he tried to toughen up his voice. Scared? We weren't scared. Just felt you need some space to blow off some steam is all, preferably without breaking any of the kitchen equipment, or someone's bones. The comment actually caused Renka to somewhat regress to her aggressive state, clanging her fist in anger. Believe me, I fully planned on doing some bone breaking, among other things. The girl spoke those last words with a sadistic smile on her face that once again made Ryu and Shukatsu want to run for the hills. Though the two managed to break out of their little freight fest as they noticed Renka's anger was clearly not focused at them but rather beyond the kitchen door. Not wanted to be kept in suspense, and frankly wanting to all but shot the elephant in the room dead, they both asked the obvious question. Just what the heck has you so pissed off, Renka? Rather than answer, she simply pointed beyond the doors, causing the duo to make their way over and look through it. Eyes darting from table to attempt to find the person the girl was pointing at. You'd think spotting someone they had no information on in a huge restaurant would be difficult, right? Wrong. Thanks in part to Naruto, the restaurant had gained an infamous reputation for being rather violent to unruly customers. Anyway, stupid or cocky enough to try and pull anything unseemly would end up leaving with their teeth coming out their nose. Of course, that didn't stop the occasional overconfident jackass from showing up to cause trouble. So really all they had to do was look for someone that stood out amongst the crowd as both a fighter and a guy who clearly was looking to get attention. The search took all of about 1/100th of a second before they spotted, quiet possibly, the attention-grabbing guy in the entire restaurant. He was currently seated at one of the nearby tables, one eye lightly skimming over a menu laid out in front of him, though he didn't seem all that interested. Really didn't seem surprising considering the way the guy looked. Standing around close to 6 feet, he was a well-built man with long, light blue hair that hung in a ponytail down to his waist and had a pretty boy face that would make any girl swoon. Blue seemed to be his favorite color, as he was dressed in a mostly blue jacket with a red left sleeve along with a pair of blue pants and shoes. He also seemed to have a clear fondness for birds if the golden eagle necklace or blue bird wing tattoo under his left eye were any indication. Speaking of his eyes, they were the oddest thing about the boy, as his right eye was a light shade of ice blue while his left eye was a fiery red. Overall, he clearly wasn't your run-of-the-mill customer, and stood out like a broken thumb. Clearly the guy wasn't afraid of being watched, especially considering practically every teenage girl and some older women were eyeballing him from every direction. Ryu scarfed his head, still somewhat puzzled by Renka's anger. Okay, I see some pretty boy getting eyed by every person with 2 XX chromosomes in the restaurant. Save for you, of course. And you're mad at him because? Renka stared on for a moment, obviously trying to keep her composure. I had to take the guy's order and figured if his looks were anything to go by, he'd be the type of guy to try and make a pass at me. Not that I'd be interested anyway. Still, I tried to get the guy's attention, but the lousy jerk didn't even hear a word I said. Ryu nodded somewhat, slowly piecing things together. Okay, I can see how that would be annoying. But if I recall, you and Naruto went through the exact same scenario. He then broke out in a smirk, and now not even a few months later you're already going on dates with each other. Probably won't be long before you start kissing and… The sound of loud clanging resounded as Ryu had a metal serving tray smacked against his right knee, causing him to shut up while Renka looked at him with a sinister smile. Anyway, after a few more attempts I actually considered just telling the guy to leave, and finally he reacted by shooting his mouth off. As she thought about his specific words, the young girl's fist tightened considerably to the point where it seemed close to bleeding. When I asked the guy why he'd been ignoring me, the only thing he said was he didn't hear any words, only the annoying sound of a mindless insect buzzing in his ears. Renka actually attempted to use air quotes for the last part, while speaking in a slightly deep voice with a condescending tone before pointing to the forced smile she had on her face while speaking. And to top it all off, the guy actually said every last word with this same shit-eating grin on his face, like it was some kind of compliment. Her eyes again drifted to the window of the kitchen, zeroing in on the stranger, whose eyes had now turned attention away from the menu and solely focused on the various patrons in the restaurant, clearly looking upon each individual without a hint of interest, almost as if he was staring at a blank wall. The sight of this caused Renka to become even more frustrated. Just look at the grin on his face. Cocky son of a bitch thinks he's just above everyone here. I ought to. Oh, you'll do what, Renka? The brunette felt a slight shiver go down her spine at the familiar tone of Master Hakubi, who somehow managed to sneak into the kitchen. He gazed at the girl with his usual friendly gaze, yet the girl could literally feel his eyes peering into her behind the thick glasses on his face. However, she managed to shake the feeling off thanks in no small part to the all-powerful force of righteous female fury, though it was toned down since she was still scared of Hakubi. She pointed at the table of the man who insulted her, mustering up a weak glare. Come on, Master Hakubi. The guy at that table is a total prick, and I'm not just saying that because he insulted me. Just the way he looked at me, at everybody, like he thinks we're almost invisible or insignificant. It's frustrating. Hakubi merely looked at Renka for a moment before looking to the boy at the table, his eyes widening for a moment before quickly narrowing as he sensed the aura surrounding the boy. I never expected one of them to show up here of all places. It's far too soon for them to be making any type of attempt on us, and I don't sense any master class fighters in the area. I guess the boy is on his own, but for what reason? The old man reflexively stroked his beard for a moment, whilst Renka and the others watched as the wheels in his head continued to turn. I can't very well have any kind of conflict arising here. If I raise my hand against the boy, it'd be only a matter of moments before word reaches his master, and I fear the desolation that would bring to this place. Hakubi made a quick glance at Renka, still huffing slightly in frustration at her inability to strike against her verbal assaulter. For now, it's best I keep the situation from becoming too volatile and spiraling out of control. It's best to just maintain the peace and hope that nothing goes amiss. Hakubi then calmly turned to Renka with a more managerial expression than his usual grandfatherly one. Renka, even if said man has insulted you, you need to remember that he is still a customer, and unless he actually threatens you with harm, you can't start a fight with him. Martial arts are for protecting, not for settling a petty argument, understood? The young female fighter seemed to deflate at Hakubi's response, her hair loops actually dropping in response as well, meriting a chuckle out the old master. You shouldn't let things like that bother you so much, Renka, especially considering the more positive experiences you have day by day. She seemed to perk up at the master's words, though his eyes gained a particular gleam. Which reminds me, you never told me how your date with Naruto went last night. Any progressions in the contact area I should know about? In a matter of seconds, Renka's face exploded in color, before twisting her neck at inhuman speed to a nearby wall. Oh, look, the time. Need to get back out there and serve the other customers. Later. Nothing was left but a speed trail as she darted back outside, though obviously making attempts to avoid contact with her fellow brunette. The dust trail she created was the sight the subject of hers and Hakubi's conversation caught a glimpse of as he was taking an order from another table. Huh, Renka seems even more high-strung than usual. Wonder what's got her so bent out of shape. He paused for a minute before thinking back to the rather enjoyable night he spent with said girl not too long ago. I wonder if I might have done something last night that upset her. I mean, I'm not exactly a dating expert, but I thought I handled things pretty well. The blonde continued to muse over his thoughts as he approached the next table, not even paying much attention to the one seated. Probably should talk with Hakubi about how things went once I'm done here. He does seem to know a bit more about dating than you'd think. With his solution found, the blonde turned his attention to the patron at the table, or rather the menu he was holding, which obstructed the blonde's view. Honestly, Naruto really didn't care what the guy looked like, so it wasn't really an issue, even if it was a little rude. Quickly taking out his order sheet and pencil, he cleared his throat out to try and get the hidden individual's attention. Alright, welcome to Gekurin. What can I get for you today? The patron didn't respond at first, though it was hard to tell if he was simply ignoring the blonde or didn't quite hear him. Thankfully, he did respond before any assumptions could be made. Difficult to say, really. I've heard quite a great many things about some of the chicken dishes here, yet at the same time I find it difficult to even consider eating a creature with wings, small as they are. His response was rather unusual, as it got the blonde to raise an eyebrow slightly at the comment as the man went on talking about the different food choices. Seems like I can't quite make up my mind. Any suggestions? Naruto actually had to restrain himself from sighing. Even though he enjoyed working in Gekurin, there were times the job felt like those lame-ass deranked missions from back in the village, where trained ninjas actually had to help civilians do things they were simply too lazy to do themselves. Regardless, it was part of the job, and at the very least this job wasn't nearly as demeaning as chasing after that damn cat Tora. So the blonde quietly complied with his request. To be honest, I rather enjoy some of the noodle dishes. It's not quite as good as ramen, but enjoyable overall. So you actually prefer eating things as simple as noodles and broth? It's funny, some say you can learn quite a lot about a person from what they eat, and based on what you've just told me says you're little more than a dog slurping food from a bowl. It took a great deal of Soul's special anger management training and the added threat of an increasing bill that kept the blonde from literally reach over and beating the living hell out of the man. No, instead he opted to just slightly tighten his grip on the pencil in hand while managing out a forced sentence. Well, everyone's entitled to their opinion. The strain in the ex-shinobi's voice was evident, yet he remained calm for the most part. At least until the guy followed up the comment with, "Though I suppose being like a dog isn't so bad compared to a worthless insect, like all the others around us." A loud snap resounded through the individual's ears, his single red eye catching sight of the eraser tip of the blonde waiter's pencil fly into the air. His gaze drifted to his face, which showed a deep, hate-filled frown, whilst his left leg showed a furious twitch, obviously wanting to unleash one of his signature kicks into the teen's face. The blue-haired patron remained completely calm, lightly setting the menu down as he placed his elbows on the table and interlocked his fingers. Seems like dog was a rather accurate description of you. Loyal to a fault and quick to lash out when annoyed. Honestly, I was expecting the service around here to be better. Naruto literally had to restrain himself from shoving his foot into the man's throat, just to shut his comments up. He felt very tempted to just walk away. Though I suppose I shouldn't be too surprised. Being the disciple of the dancing sun god after all. Naruto found himself frozen in place, though only for a moment. His eyes narrowing as he turned his body fully to face the stranger, his stance neutral yet ready to act at the drop of a hat. The stranger merely chuckled at his antics, clearly not the least bit threatened. You know, your master is quite famous in the martial arts world. A legendary master of Capiria, referred as one of the strongest men on the planet, whose might and skill are matched by a rare few. Thus his action of taking on a disciple was bound to make waves through the world, especially amongst our sordid ranks. In spite of him trying to keep the conversation serious, the blue-haired teen kept that same placid smile on his face, acting as if they were having a normal conversation. Of course, I didn't think much of it, figured it was just a bunch of rumors. Then lo and behold, the great fighting demon Sugetsuma returns from a long absence to report an encounter with said disciple, and even claiming he was impressed with his skills. Naruto continued to find his body tensing up greatly as the seemingly one-sided conversation continued, silently praying no one would pay them any mind whilst listening as the stranger continued. Naturally, with that information in mind, I felt it was in the best interest of all parties involved to check on this new disciple for myself, see how well he holds up. He paused for a moment, his eyes clearly giving the ex-ninja a mental once-over. You were pretty hard to find actually, despite Sugetsu describing you as having the eyes of a demon and the fighting power of a rabid beast. Then again, I doubt anyone would think to look for such a man in a relatively simple Chinese restaurant. Again he paused, casually taking a sip of a glass of water that had been placed at the table. Taking advantage of the pause, Naruto chose to end his own silence. I take it that means you're a part of Wyomai, aren't you? He questioned, got the teen to actually halt his drinking before gaining a smirk and lowering his glass to the table, eyeing the blonde with interest. Huh, I take it Soul told you about us, didn't he? Naruto didn't even respond, not wishing to waste the energy with the teen. Considering I spent 6 months with the guy, you really didn't think he wouldn't mention it. He spoke with a slightly agitated tone, though it only served to make the blue-haired boy chuckle. No, I suppose not, though I'd be lying if I said it didn't seem possible given how your master is known to act. He continued to chuckle at his comment. Naruto was having a hard time not agreeing with him, given how well he knew his master. Still, he felt the need to deal with one last elephant in the room. Alright, so you wanted to see me. So here I am. Now would you mind leaving? I'm not interested in getting involved with you or Wyomai, so either order something or kindly take your sorry ass elsewhere. I'm really not in the mood to deal with your bullshit. Naruto managed to keep his tone relatively unhostile, but it was not easy. He already had enough problems trying to balance his life at the restaurant with his Ragnarok identity. Adding Wyomai to the mix could only end badly, and with the way things were going with Renka, that was the last thing he needed. His tone, however, didn't seem to upset the boy, rather he just continued to smile. It was seriously starting to creep him out. Now there's no need to get so bent out of shape. Even though I imagine you'll been having dealing with Wyomai in the future where your membership will come into question, I didn't come here for that reason. His eyes quickly narrowed, almost resembling a hawk's as they zeroed in on the blonde with a piercing gaze. I came here because I want to see just how good you truly are, and if you're really worthy of joining us someday. Naruto found himself somewhat scoffing at the brunette's response, mostly because he saw it coming from a mile away. While Naruto wasn't completely familiar with Wyomai as a whole since his master had little information on them himself, one thing Soul made pretty clear was that each member was trained to do one thing: fight. It was thoroughly programmed into each of them, not unlike his own ninja training, and they were always looking for a fight with somebody. Granted, he could still understand it as part of a fighter's natural desire to test their skills and grow stronger, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Regardless, he had no interest in getting involved with the teen. However, he didn't even get his first words out as the YOMI teen quietly spoke, eyes seemingly targeting every person in the establishment. You know, in spite of my comment, this establishment actually is rather nice. Friendly staff, somewhat decent food, and most of all, it's protected by some rather impressive martial artists. His tone was still fairly mirthful, yet Naruto could tell his tone would change drastically in a matter of seconds, indicating his true intentions. I myself, in spite of my skills, wouldn't be foolish enough to attack this place on my own, of course. After all, you have a master present, and I'm just a disciple. It would hardly be fair. As if a lever had been pulled, the teen's eyes suddenly became serious and sinister, showing a small trace of delight at what he was going to say. Then again, I wonder how the higher-ups of the organization would react if I told them about said master's connections to those in Ryozanpaku. I imagine things would get rather messy around here, don't you think? A resounding slam was heard by all. Several faces turned drastically to see the table Naruto and the stranger stood at. The blonde's palm placed on the table, striking the wood with enough controlled force to create several cracks and ripples in the wood. Many of the patrons actually turned away in fright at the vicious look in the blonde's eyes, yet the blue-haired boy across from him looked on with excitement. Now those are the eyes of the demon I was hoping to see. Taking the blonde's action as a clear response to his challenge, he promptly stood up, acting as if the entire excursion hadn't happened, calmly waving to all those around that there was nothing to fear. I'll be giving you the location of our battle sometime tomorrow, so best prepare yourself. Also, I trust you'll keep it a secret, of course. With curt nod, he made his way past the blonde, his palms still planted firmly on the table, yet people could see his pressure on the table increasing as the wood groaned under the weight. The strange teen made it to Naruto's side, inches away from him before offering one last smile, only serving to infuriate him further. By the way, I forgot about proper introductions, forgive me for that. With a slight nod of his head and upper body in a mock bow-like fashion, he spoke in a mockingly regal manner. I am Sho Kano, disciple of Akira Hongo, the God Hand, and I look forward to our fight. He took 2 more steps past the blonde before turning to him again, his confident smile once again adorning his face. By the way, you really should lighten up, my friend. Maintaining a positive attitude is important, and you could really use some cheering up. With those words, he left through the doors whilst leaving Naruto standing again in place, his hand pushing again on the table. There was great deal of silence amongst the patrons, none wanting to say anything towards the blonde, mainly for fear of setting him off. The tension built as the blonde slowly straightened his posture before calmly removing his palm from the table, a large series of cracks emanating from the point of contact. Naruto simply stood there for another moment, eyes focusing intently on the doors from a moment, mind processing everything that had just taken place, and, quietly, dusted his hands off before offering the vast majority of patrons one of his larger grins. Sorry about that, folks, just a little disagreement, nothing to worry about, just go back to your food, alright. He spoke in a tone that clearly attempted to maintain a degree of composure, but still contained traces of strain. Thankfully for him, none of the patrons could pick up on that subtle information and took the request in kind, acting as if the excursion hadn't happened. With the disaster avoided, the current ninth fist made his way back to the kitchen, silently kicking himself for almost losing control of his anger that time. True, Naruto had more than once let his temper fly in the restaurant, but that had always been with Chinese mafia members, so it seemed perfectly warranted. However, his secretive behavior already had Renka and Hakubi suspicious of him, and starting a fight with some random stranger would only serve to elevate things further. And yet, that guy knew all the right buttons to push just to try and get a rise out of me, and here I thought Loki was the only blue-haired prick I'd have to deal with. Releasing an annoyed sigh, the blonde rubbed the back of his head as he reached the doors. Then again, it's not like Soul Sensei didn't warn me about this kind of thing happening. Still, coming at me in the open like that really complicates things. Just hope I can this under wraps for now. He silently entered the kitchen and was quickly confronted by Renka. Thankfully, however, she didn't seem the slightest bit suspicious of his prior actions. If anything, she seemed a bit understanding. So I take it you had an encounter with our newest patron and his colorful commentary? She asked quietly, looking upon him with interest whilst Naruto was mentally scratching his head at the question. Renka saw his confusion and chose to be a little clearer. I meant that blue-haired jerk you almost went bouncer all over. Was actually kind of hoping you knock him down a notch, that arrogant dick. Naruto found himself sweat dropping at the humorously angry look on her face coupled with a tightly clenched fist. Silently thanking the world for Renka's thin skin whilst also jotting down insulting Renka as another reason to kick Sho's fly boy ass, the blonde quickly started picking up serving trays yet still focusing on his friend/potential girlfriend. Believe me Renka, I would have loved to leave a nice dirty boot print all over that jerk's face. But I also don't feel like owing Hakubi any more money or causing another scene. Besides, I can always knock him senseless another time. His comment calmed the brunette down enough, and she smirked slightly at the idea of Sho getting a severe ass kicking. Actually led to a bit of chuckling amongst the pair, which merited small grins from the others in the kitchen. Of course they still went about their tasks. Yet all kidding aside, the blonde still felt an uneasy feeling in the pit of his stomach, musing over Sho's little threat and challenge. No telling when or where I'll run into that guy again. Would have been a bit more helpful if he at least gave me an idea of how he's gonna contact me. Then again, considering the way he was acting, I'm guessing being completely straightforward isn't his way of thinking. Still, I'm worried about when he'll make his move, especially with Loki and his little favors popping up who knows when. It was these thoughts that continued to plague the blonde's mind for the remainder of the day, actually causing him to zone out from time to time. Yet thankfully not enough to rouse anyone's attention, as he continued through the day and into the night. Time skipped next day. And here I thought I was dealing with someone who was actually smart. Instead I get another blue-haired wise ass who seems to get his kick from jerking me around like a dog on leash. I honestly can't wait to kick this guy's ass. Those were the words Naruto found himself mumbling as he quietly walked along the streets of the more rural areas of the city. Knowing that Sho's challenge would come today, he quickly asked for the day off at Gekurin, which Hakubi allowed, though it was obvious to the blonde that he suspected something. Then again, Hakubi was a master-class fighter with skills almost equal to the Ryozanpaku masters. Even so, there wasn't a whole lot he could do about the situation given that Sho had outright threatened the restaurant with the full force of his organization's power. The thought of said action caused the blonde to briefly imagine the restaurant in ruins and all the people inside it either wiped out or buried underneath rubble. It was a scene all too reminiscent of the scene he came upon in his home's darkest hour. The once proud Leaf Village, a paragon of strength and willpower throughout the ages, nothing more than a barren crater. Worst part of the scenario was that in that situation the person doing the wrecking, at the very least, was attempting to achieve peace, misguided and twisted as it was. From what Naruto had been told by Soul about Yami, it was basically an organization composed entirely of martial artists who followed what was known as Satsujuken, Killing Fist, who devoted themselves to proving that their way of martial arts was the right way. I doubt you using martial arts for killing. Truthfully, Naruto didn't honestly think much about the group. Even though his master admitted to being a member of said group, he didn't hold it against him. After all, Soul didn't seem like the kind of guy who'd go off on a causal killing spree, even if it was to supposedly show the superiority of his own martial arts style. Even so, being Soul's disciple was bound to come with some complications, though personally he'd been hoping that they'd just ignore him. So much for that. Guess Soul's past was gonna catch up with me eventually. Well, here's to hoping I can make it through this little excursion without any attention being drawn. Oh, who the hell am I kidding? There's no way I'm gonna be able to keep this a secret. Sure, if it was just me and Sho it wouldn't be a problem, but then again. Hey Naruto, slow down would you? And stop zoning out for 5 minutes. I'd prefer it if we at least talk for a little bit before you tune me out. The blonde mentally slapped himself in the face as he turned slightly to make eye contact with one Rankama, currently following him, having chosen to take the day off, as well in order to spend more time with him. On the one hand, yes, he liked the idea of spending time with his female coworker/potential love interest. Frankly, at this point he certainly could benefit from some more positive interaction. However, at the same time this had to be the absolute worst time for this to happen. Loki might have been a royal pain in the ass, but Sho clearly wasn't the kind of guy to screw around with. Naruto could tell just by looking in the guy's eyes. Sure, he looked perfectly harmless, but beyond the mask he held was an emotionless being who wouldn't have any problems with killing another person. Which is part of the reason why he wanted Renka to stay as far away as humanly possible. She was good, but if Sho really was from YOMI, well, it wouldn't be pretty. With a sigh, the blonde continued to make his way through the streets of the more suburban areas, making small note of the Kwan houses surrounding him, yet his attention never strayed from the girl next to him. You know, Renka, you don't have to follow me everywhere I go. Was kinda of hoping for some time to myself, to be honest. The blue-haired girl merely scoffed at the remark. Don't give me that. We barely ever get to spend a lot of time with each other outside of the restaurant. Plus, I figured after that little encounter you had with that jerk at the restaurant you'd like have me around. A slight flinch at the mention of Sho was all the response Renka got out of the blonde, who she was looking upon with a keen eye. Something's bugging him, more than usual. Ever since he talked with that blue-haired freak, it's almost like that time with Sujetsu. Renka found herself briefly flashing back to that rather painful experience. She herself reminded of the pain in both her ribs and legs as Sujetsu slammed her into the wall, the haunting feeling she had upon seeing Naruto hurt. Yet the worst was the chill she felt run down her spine as she recalled her friend's tonal shift, no longer fighting with the calm precision she'd seen him use to dispatch common thugs. No, in those brief moments his movements seemed primal, ferocious, and downright bestial. Sure, for a moment he seemed to revert to his more welcoming persona, yet there was something unsettling about the way he acted and fought in those brief moments. And now it seemed like that side of himself was slowly making its way back to the surface, in spite of the fact Renka felt closer to Naruto, thanks in no small part to their date the day before. It was something that unnerved the girl, and she feared what would happen if that side of himself resurfaced in full. Still, she tried to keep quiet about it for the most part, somewhat hoping the moment was nothing more than an isolated incident. So long as they didn't run into that guy again, things should be perfectly fine. The pair continued to walk along the sidewalk for several more blocks, maintaining a degree of silence as they continue on their trek with no particular direction in sight. The pace continued for some time until the pair oddly enough found themselves at the edge of the forested areas near the city. Naruto actually ended up letting out a content sigh at the sight of the wooded lands, fairly reminiscent of his home back in the village hidden in the leaves. Was actually pretty refreshing change of pace to be out of the city. Though at the same time he knew he couldn't let his guard down. Sho was out there somewhere, and he just knew the blue-haired fly boy would pop up sooner or later. Question just was when and how. So Naruto, we gonna keep walking all day, or is there an actual destination you have in mind? With a slight turn of the neck, the former ninja simply paid the girl a fairly dry expression, his mouth completely flat and his eyes half-lidded. You know, Renka, I was just planning on going for a walk by myself, didn't really have any specific location in mind, and I never said you had to come with me either. Even though his tone wasn't hostile, Renka could clearly pick up on the subtle hint he didn't want her around right now, and it actually made her push back a little bit. Her face actually became somewhat withdrawn, and she diverted her eyes from his, not saying a word. Inwardly, Naruto actually felt like kicking himself. He didn't want to come across as hostile towards Renka. He just wanted for her to leave for now until he got things settled before it spiraled out of control. Even so, taking another glance at Renka, the ex-shinobi, he could see she had become somewhat closed off, and even if it was important, he still didn't want her to hate him. So with another sigh, he slowly turned to face her. Listen, Renka, I'm... A loud screech quickly silenced his words as the pair looked up to the tree they were standing under to. Looking up, the pair spotted a fairly large bird with a mixture of brown and white feathers. The brown primarily dominate, covering the entire up part of its body, while the white feathers remained on its underbelly. It looked to be about close to 20 inches tall, with a bright yellow beak and razor-sharp eyes, staring at Naruto almost like it was watching each and every skin cell on his face. Renka meanwhile looked upon the bird with a sense of awe. There's something you don't see every day. Most of the time you're lucky to see normal birds around this area, but a falcon, that's pretty impressive. Naruto nodded slightly, his eyes actually trying to peer into the creature's own eyes for some reason, actually getting into a sort of stare down with the creature. Quite impressive creature, wouldn't you say? According to most ornithologists, creatures like these are capable of seeing things from almost 30 kilometers away. Naruto felt his eyes snap open, his body reflexively spinning as he turned to find Shokano, literally standing just a mere 2 feet away from them with a carefree smile on his face as he admired the bird above them. Naruto, of course, found himself looking at the teen with a calculating gaze. Somehow he managed to sneak up on me and Renka, and I didn't even sense him coming. His eyes narrowed as he once again could now feel that chillingly calm yet oppressive aura, all but reminding him of the bird above them, standing there silently, watching with a keen eye, all but ready to strike. Renka, of course, took a little longer to take note of the blue-haired teen's presence. That being said, once she did spot him, and the floodgates burst open. Mustering up a hostile glare, the bell-haired girl actually got up right next to the guy without a single look of fear in her eyes. "You again? Didn't we already tell you to stay as far away from us as possible, or were you just not listening?" Sho responded by not listening and instead continuing on his monologue about the bird. This bird in particular is the peregrine falcon. It's considered to be one of the most lethal predatory birds, able to reach speeds of over 120 miles per hour when in a dive. Couple that with its impressive eyesight, sharp talons and beak, as well as lightning fast reaction time. His eyes slowly drifted from the bird to Naruto, now becoming almost identical to those of Falcon, seemingly zeroing in on him like he had a bullseye on his forehead and ensuring he had no place for escape as he spoke the next lines that were a clear go-to for, "You know what comes next. Once it has its prey locked in its sights, there's no escaping it, no matter where it runs or hides." The teen quietly lowered his arms as he fully rotated his body to face the pair, though his eyes were zeroed in solely on Naruto, paying virtually no mind to Renka. Despite the clearly fierce stare Naruto was giving him, it only served to bring the teen an even greater sense of excitement. Of course, that still left one minor inconvenience. Have to say I'm a little bit surprised. I wasn't expecting you to bring your friend here with you. I figured you above all things wanted to be discreet. Naruto's hands tightened at the last words. A brief glance at Renka, whose face shifted briefly to confusion as she looked at Naruto curiously, causing the blonde to actually sweat a little, all the while inwardly cursing Sho with every fiber of his being. Discreet? Naruto, what the heck is this guy talking about? You know him from somewhere or something? Renka's obvious interest in being given a straight answer was making the blonde feel caught in a bind, and he could only feel his rage towards Sho building as the blue-haired teen continued to watch him with amusement. I'm of course not opposed to an audience if that's what you want. Personally, I just figured you wanted to avoid that sort of thing if all possible. Naruto actually felt the need to plant his foot as deeply into the ground as humanly possible, almost hoping do so would be enough to shut the blue-haired teen up. At this point there were only two things he wanted. One was to knock Sho's block off, and the other unfortunately required him to do something he really wished he didn't have to, but... Renka. His voice was silent and hollow, grabbing the girl's attention as she looked at his face, which had become somewhat blank and expressionless, yet she could feel the inner beast screaming to be set free. He offered her a single glance before quietly muttering out the words, "Leave, now." Though he didn't say it with much force, Renka literally felt herself cringe at the unsettling feeling it gave her. Of course, that didn't stop her from responding, "Naruto, just what is going on here? You can't just expect me to leave here without giving me some kind of..." Renka's words died in her throat as she felt an immensely unsettling aura surround her. Eyes widened as her breath hitched. Terror brimmed inside of her like none she had even known. Not since she'd encountered her murderous uncle had she felt such a feeling. And yet this feeling was different. It wasn't as strong, but it contained far greater ferocity. Primal anger as opposed to the unending bloodlust seen by her uncle. What truly terrified her was that it was all coming from Naruto, whose eyes truly looked like they belonged on a fearsome predator, ready to lash out without a single thought. The feeling was so intense Renka almost swore she actually saw the outline of a massive canine-like creature standing behind the boy. "I won't ask again, Renka, leave now." His voice was ice cold, hints of barely restrained anger contained within it, which shook the girl to her very core. This was not the kind-hearted boy whom she'd worked alongside, nor the bright and cheerful one, whom she'd only gazed on for a moment, yet it was the moment in which he had forever captured her heart. This was a soulless animal, content only with satisfying its most basic instinct, to attack and kill. Almost wordlessly the girl slowly backed away from the scene, yet continued to look upon the boy with slight horror and fear before she disappeared into the forest. Sho actually whistling at the display. My, you truly are just like a beast, aren't you? Though I suppose it was for the best. After all, little bugs like her don't belong in this. Sho didn't have a chance to finish as he quickly jumped back to avoid a fast kick before ducking at a 90-degree angle to avoid a front kick, managing a quick glance at the tree behind him, whose trunk was literally shattered by the kick with the tree's top falling to the ground. Of course, he still didn't show any signs of worry or fear as he evaded the attacks, still smiling casually as if nothing was happening, a little overeager I see. Not that I can blame you, but we really should wait a moment to establish some ground rules, don't you think? Naruto didn't even bother responding, rather he just took his already extended leg, lifted it as high as he could before slamming it down in the form of a fearsome axe kick, determined to bury Sho in the dirt. The kick created a massive blast of dirt and rocks, and anyone watching would have assumed Naruto had made contact. However, the loud, almost feral roar emanating from the blonde's throat made it pretty clear that wasn't the case. When the dust cleared, Naruto was still in place whilst Sho was nowhere to be found. Angrily ripping his leg out of the crater he laid, the blonde's eyes quickly searched for the strange teen. He didn't have to look very hard as he quickly noticed a strange shadow hanging overhead. Unfortunately, he didn't have a chance to look as his reflexes kicked into overdrive as he crouched low to the ground to avoid a fast roundhouse kick to the neck before having to literally flip his body sideways to avoid the follow-up front kick. Taking advantage of his momentum, the blonde quickly balanced himself on his left palm before using the rotation to unleash a powerful swinging kick. Unlike before, Sho wasn't fast enough to dodge it, and Naruto almost felt the urge to smirk as his foot got close to the cocky teen's pretty boy face. A resounding smack was heard as Naruto's shoe met flesh and bone, though not quite in the correct place. Not too bad. Honestly, there was a part of me that was concerned you wouldn't last past my first two moves. Glad to see I was wrong. Naruto frowned intensely at the sight of Sho standing there with his nonchalant grin continuing to grace his face. Though the ex-shinobi's fury wasn't so overbearing that he didn't notice his left leg, current caught in Sho's iron-like grip, leaving him currently stuck on hand. His mind quickly flashed through the events his eyes managed to catch, quietly admiring what he'd seen. This guy really is with YOMI. Managed to catch my kick just before it made contact with him in almost a split second and hold my leg in place in spite of my momentum. That's not just something you can do with strength alone. Sho just continued to watch with amusement as the captured Capiria fighter glared at him intensely, which admittedly looked pretty silly considering he was in a one-armed handstand, but regardless, so, how long are you going to stand like that? I imagine that's not all you've got after all. After all, I imagine you want to get this over with and get back to that girl, right? In a split second, Sho all but immediately regretted those words as he suddenly felt a heavy force crash against his left cheek, his eyes catching sight of his enemy's free foot embedding itself in his face. The force of the strike was enough to force him to release his hold on his foe, who managed to straighten himself up before landing softly on his feet. Sho likewise managed to easily readjust himself despite being pushed back a few feet, blood lightly dripping down his lip, whilst his cheek was dark red. Naruto's ferocity had returned in full, Sho looking into his eyes now fully demonized, looking at him like a tiger locked on its prey. Listen to me, asshole. I only came here because I knew somehow, someway I was gonna have to fight you since I seemed to just be a walking magnet for manipulative blue-haired pieces of shit who just seemed to enjoy trying to make me into their obedient little dog. The blonde slowly shifted into his signature Jenga stance as he began to rotate from left to right. Apparently you people just can't help but try to fuck up everything in my life, and as if my luck was bad enough already, now thanks to you I had to act like an absolute prick to Rinka. His tone became more aggressive and fierce with each word as he geared up to attack. Now, since you guys can't seem to learn anything with a heavy dosage of blunt force trauma, I'm gonna personally make it a point to stomp over every last part of you miserable body like it's pavement. So I hope you're ready for an ass-kicking, pal, 'cause I'm not gonna stop until I've personally broken every square inch of your sorry ass. Sho didn't even seem the least bit fazed by the blonde's vulgar language or threats. Really, he just seemed completely neutral at first. For a moment he simply didn't even seem to react, though slowly his body began to shake as a light chuckling was heard. Gradually it grew louder, though not to the point where it sounded maniacal or borderline sociopathic. Oddly enough, it sounded rather content. My, I knew you'd be interesting, but I never imagined it would be this much fun. He took a moment to take another look at Naruto's face, his hawk-like gaze mulling over every detail. Yes, now those are the eyes of a true demon. A creature whose fury is worthy to be viewed as truly great, and whose ferocity in combat is the greatest honor to face. Without a word, Sho dropped into his own stance. One Naruto felt looked vaguely familiar to one he'd seen Kenichi enter, yet it had far less blind spots and looked far more polished, the sign of a far more skilled warrior. Sho took in a breath as his grin became larger than his face seemed to handle, yet still maintaining that same look of enjoyment and mirth. Come on, demon, let's see how you fly. Chapter 16. Does this prick have wings on his feet or something? He's hopping all over the place. Naruto's rage-filled thoughts roared in the depths of his mind as Sho managed to again evade another of his kicks, hopping high into the air, almost as if his entire body was weightless. He was almost like that of a bird, both in terms of his movement and attack pattern. The blue-haired Wyomai member quickly rotated his body towards a nearby tree, pressing his legs into the trunk before launching off like a rocket towards Naruto, a gleeful look in his eyes. Come on, little demon, is this all you've got? He quickly let loose a fast straight punch. Naruto narrowly avoiding the strike by leaning backwards only to quickly find his center of gravity broken as Sho shifted on his right foot and lashed out with his left leg, bringing it forward to trip up Naruto's own legs. The blonde didn't even have a chance to react or readjust as Sho continued his attack, plunging a palm strike into his opponent's chest, embedding it deep into his stomach and pushed him down to the ground. Hard. At first, Sho smirked as his blow making contact, admittedly looking a little disappointed at how quickly his foe had been seemingly vanquished. Though, that brief instance of sorrow was replaced with elation as he caught sight of Naruto's left leg rocketing forward towards him, like a high-powered spear. Sadly, Sho managed to respond quickly to the action. Using his left hand, he quickly positioned his palm directly over his opponent's foot, making sure his arm wasn't fully extended. Then, just as both limbs made contact, the blue-haired warrior bent his elbow and arm forward, seemingly pushing against the leg itself for a few moments, before fully pushing up, effectively using the momentum of the kick and his own bent arm to significantly lessen the damage of the kick and push himself high into the air. He actually chuckled at the frustrated growl he heard his enemy make. No need to get upset. After all, you didn't really expect it to be so easy, did you? Sho's smirk quickly grew devious, extending his left leg out fully before flipping forward, rotating his body like a wheel and building momentum as he descended upon his still grounded opponent. In an instant, his high-speed leg struck the ground with the force of a cannonball, creating a small fissure and explosion of dust, with bits of stone flying in every direction. The dust cleared and Sho was revealed to be standing on his feet, quietly brushing dust off of his clothing. His grin was still present as he peered through the dust cloud, seemingly unaffected by the kick. Glad to see you managed to dodge that one as well. Even if you can't fly like I can, I'd hope you at least have enough mobility to crawl a few feet through the dirt. Sho's smirk grew slightly at the sound of a rage-filled growl echoing through the dust cloud. You can growl and roar all you like. Doesn't change the fact you still can't quite hit me, but please feel free to try. I'd hate to come all this way and not at least get a decent workout. Sho's senses quickly picked up on his opponent's presence, quickly shifting to block a high kick to the face with ease before also grabbing his opponent's other leg, having attempted a follow-up kick, while supporting himself on both hands. Your skills are still a bit rough and your overall technique needs work. Though given Soul only managed to train you for 6 months, I can't say I'm too surprised. Sho quickly followed up with sweep of both of Naruto's hands with a fast low kick, though he managed to avoid it, fully curling his upper body towards Sho, unleashing a fast right cross to his opponent's face. Sho responded in kind, letting go of his opponent's legs, before using his free hand to quickly deflect the punch. The Wyomai countered by letting loose a fast straight punch into Naruto's unguarded stomach. The blow itself managed to catch the ninth fist off guard enough for Sho to press forward with his attack, letting loose a second punch to his opponent's body, before adding in a well-placed knee strike for good measure. Sho geared up for another attack, this time with a sideways knife hand strike aimed his opponent's neck. Quickly cocking back his arm like a bowstring, he directed the lethal strike at his enemy's unguarded neck. However, before it reached, Naruto's arm quickly shot upwards from his stomach, easily blocking the strike with his forearm. Sho smirked a bit at the action. Still haven't completely taken the wind out of your sails yet? Well, guess I'll just have to knock harder and… Sho's comment, however, quickly became muted as he sensed a violent ki emanating from his enemy. Where'd this come from all of a sudden? He barely had time to think or contemplate what was happening as Naruto quickly shoved Sho's arm out of his way, before bringing both of his arms back, each in a knife hand position. Sho's eyes quickly widened at the stance he'd entered, actually showing slight panic at what was happening. Naruto, however, with a look of murder in his eyes, slashed both his arms together like a pair of scissors, carving through the air, aiming for both sides of his opponent's skull. Telephone! Telephone! Sho reacted quickly, leaning back and kicking off the ground as hard as he could. He began spinning backwards with incredible speed, narrowly avoiding the strike before landing on a nearby tree branch, actually seating himself on the perch while looking down on his frustrated opponent, his ever-present grin briefly vanishing from his face. The sight below was something to behold as the strikes, despite not hitting anything, had enough power behind them to kick up quite a bit of dust and wind, indicating just how much power was behind them. Sweat dripped from his brow as he thought back to the attack. If that attack had hit, I'd probably have a concussion and ruptured eardrums to boot. Guess he decided to switch gears and take this fight seriously. Sho remained on his perch for the moment, not quite eager to get in so close, at least, not without doing a little intelligence gathering first. And by that, he meant to just piss his opponent off some more and distract him. That and ask some questions that had been running through his head. Calmly standing on the branch without a care, the young teen walked across the branch, his eyes remaining trained on his opponent. I'm curious. Based on what information I could gather, Soul dropped you off here around 2 to 3 months ago, and in that time you actually came face to face with Sujetsu-ma, one of YMI's own Fists of Shadow. Naruto's rage cooled a little, cringing slightly as he recalled the instance where Renka's drunk, estranged uncle literally punched him through a wall and laid him out good. Of course, despite that first encounter and his second conversation with the brutal warrior, he avoided the subject of YMI, not even attempting to bring it up. Sho picked up on his thought process, reading his facial expressions with ease. Yet despite that encounter, you remained silent about the organization, not even bothering to bring it up. I'm curious why you seem to be avoiding YMI and YOMI for so long. Since you were trained by Soul, who is also one of the Fists of Nine Shadow, by that title alone, you are obligated to become a member of YOMI, and it's not like it is something you can just avoid forever? Naruto remained silent, his prior rage having cooled, trying not to get rattled at his questions. He wasn't naive enough to believe he could just stay hidden from YMI forever, knowing full well they'd come for him eventually. Either that or when Soul eventually returned to continue his training, he'd all but be dragged into the group's affairs. So why did he not simply ask about the organization to begin with? Sho didn't respond as he watched with mild amusement as his opponent stood still in contemplation. Well, whatever your reason, it doesn't really matter anyway. Naruto's head jerked up in response to the comment, paying close attention to his opponent's words. Regardless of whether you like it or not, once you are a part of YOMI you can't simply leave. Sho paused for a moment, scratching his chin in mock contemplation before raising his finger in a eureka-like gesture. Well, okay, that's not entirely true. There is one way to get out of YOMI, and that would be to lose to another disciple of another master, thereby turning your position over to him or her. Naruto frowned at the notion. Obviously he wasn't too keen on joining YOMI for a number of reasons he could outright name right now, yet the idea of getting his ass handed to him by another person just for that didn't sit well with him. Still, though I'm guessing based on your expression that's not really the best option. Sho, who'd started walking on the branch on his hands for some reason, smirked a little at the question. Shifting his body onto one hand and pushing himself up and down with ease, Sho continued to speak. Most likely not. For that to work, there'd need to be a martial artist of similar skill to your master who also happens to have a disciple of his own. Unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your viewpoint, Superior Masters fit for YMI's ranks are practically non-existent, and the few who even measure up to our standards are typically content with simply living out their days in isolation. Though considering we've already got the most accomplished master of the style on our side anyway, seems kind of pointless really. Sho quickly springboarded of his hands and back onto his feet, casually leaning against the trunk of the tree, pulling a small branch off of it. Though even if there was a disciple capable of challenging you, losing your position to him wouldn't be a wise tactic. Sho's tone took on a darker pitch, as his fingers slowly applied pressure to the branch in his hand. Naruto's frown deepened at the change in tone and obvious implication. Let me guess, if I lose then I. A loud snapping sound drowned out his last word, Sho looking at the now broken branch, one piece hanging limply like a hangman's noose. You die. Pretty much. To us, if you aren't strong enough to defeat an opponent you either challenge upon request or are challenged by, then you're not worthy being amongst our group. Sho quickly tossed the broken branch aside before turning back to his opponent. Smirking, Sho crossed his arms, looking down on his opponent like a hawk, clearly bored with the conversation. So now that I've given you the basic YOMI orientation speech, ready to get back to business. Staying grounded like this is getting tedious, and I'd like to resume. The blue-haired teen turned for a moment, quickly crossing both arms across his chest, before his body was sent flying back to the ground, struck with the force of a rifle bullet courtesy of a strong kick from his opponent who'd all but literally jumped the gun, leaping forward towards his enemy without hesitation. If you hate sticking to the ground so much, then you are really gonna hate me. 'Cause I foresee you and the ground forming very deep connection before this fight's over. Naruto spoke confidently, watching his opponent soar towards the ground like a penguin trying to fly. The impact of his fall would have been substantial, but Sho once again showed his skill by managing to adjust his body, allowing him to land on his feet. Though the force behind the kick that sent him falling still carried with him, leaving several cracks in the hard ground, Sho actually having to hold back a wince, yet his smile remained. Heh, coming here I was a little worried. Until recently pretty much every fighter I've come across has been little more than an insignificant bug, whose existence I feel ashamed to even acknowledge, and I was concerned you'd turn out just like them. Sho's smirk quickly grew into a gleeful one, full of excitement and elation, seemingly just barely holding down his own apparent enjoyment. While I can't say you're especially entertaining, you've at least proven my reference to you as a dog was a more accurate assumption than an insect. At the very least, dogs are creatures you can acknowledge with some degree of respect, if only for their loyalty and occasional pleasant company. Naruto raced towards Sho before lashing out with a strong high kick aimed to crack the skull. Sho raised his arm and easily blocked the blow, only for Naruto to use the block as a method to go into a spin. He switched legs in the middle of the spin and sent another powerful kick at the blue-haired disciple, this time with his heel aiming to damage the boy's ribs. Sho once again blocked it, but once Naruto retracted his leg, Naruto shifted forwards, stamping his foot on the ground to gain a solid ground. He then shifted his weight onto his left leg and struck forth with a triple kick, one aimed for the head, one for the chest and the other for the groin. However, Sho leaped out of the reach of Naruto's kicks, but was quick to jump over Naruto's follow-up as the blonde went for a sweeping kick. However, as Sho landed, he was caught completely off guard when Naruto began to go into a series of spins and twists, his legs completely outstretched as he did so that he could continuously bombard Sho with attacks. The blue-haired disciple raised his arms and legs to block the strikes until Naruto leaned back, using his arms as a balance, and pushed both legs up against Sho's arms, breaking the guard of the blue-haired disciple. Utilizing great arm strength, Naruto used the momentum of his guard breaker to go into a handstand and spun on his hands to send a number of kicks at Sho, and each one struck the older disciple in his chest and face before Naruto stopped in a handstand and fell forwards. As he did so, he brought one leg downwards, smashing it down on Sho's skull before the second leg came down and brought him to the ground with terrific force. Naruto then jumped back to his feet and leaped away to look at his downed opponent. If I am a dog as you claim me to be, which I am not, then you are merely a weak dove. You aim to fly like the dove you are, but I will bite and I will snap at you until I break your wings and you will never be able to attain your dream to fly again. Naruto growled. His rage once again spiked as Sho's laughter echoed through the air. The older boy climbed back to his and rolled his neck and shoulders, a few cracks and pops echoing as he did so. The heterochromatic boy's laugh died down to chuckles as he dusted his chest and wiped the blood that came from his burst lips, spitting out some that had leaked into his mouth. Oh, you are a delight. I haven't been hit in a while, so it's good to see someone, even a dog like you, having some bite to them. I think I may have to upgrade you from dog to wolf if this keeps up. Now come at me, you want to break my wings, then let me see you try. Naruto quickly shook himself of his stupor. Frankly, I really don't give a damn what you think of me at this point. You know why? Sho's interest was piqued as he watched Naruto shift into an all-too-familiar stance, quickly shifting himself from one leg to another, yet remaining relatively in the same area. Finally starting to shift gears, I see. Finally, I've been waiting forever for this. Naruto's eyes burned with determination as his Jinga began to rapidly pick up speed. Before this fight is over, I'm gonna use my feet to wipe that stupid grin off your face. Without a single word of warning, Naruto cartwheeled over towards Sho, though at the speed he was going he looked more like a rotating saw blade. Once the gap was closed, he kicked high off the ground, flattening his body as his feet left the ground, targeting Sho for a rising kick. Quickly building up momentum, Naruto lashed out with his right leg, bringing it down like an axe towards Sho, who responded in kind, planting his feet firmly into the ground and raising his arm up in a traditional high block. The kick crashed against the arm, actually forcing Sho a few centimeters deeper into the dirt. Naruto's attack wasn't finished as he continued to rotate forward, his originally trapped leg sliding off Sho's arm, while his free leg came down towards him, intent on caving his skull in. Sho's eyes actually widened a bit at the tactic, it being a little odd given how close together they were and the rather awkward position they'd been in. Can't really dodge at this distance, and I'm gonna end up hit anyway, so. Sho managed to take advantage of his opponent's close proximity and slammed a strong uppercut into Naruto's stomach a few moments before his kick collided with his head. Both strikes hit with sufficient force, though Sho seemed to take a bit more damage, his neck clearly struggling to support the increased pressure to the skull. Though Naruto inwardly frowned at the end result. Guy managed to use the uppercut to lift me off the ground enough to lessen the impact at the last second. Though I have to wonder why I'm even acting surprised anymore. With little movement left, the two quickly pushed backwards, once again standing a few feet apart. Sho, looking up with his wide grin, despite a small trail of blood dripping down his face. Looks like someone finally started learning how to fly after all. Seems things might get more interesting after all. Naruto merely stared down his opponent, shifting back into his Jinga. You want to fly so badly? I'll send you soaring to the heavens if that's what you want. To emphasize his intent to continue, the blonde actually used the come on gesture with his hand, actively trying to goad Sho into attacking him. Sho merely smirked at his declaration, quickly wiping the blood off of face. Well then, I guess I can't argue with the eager, and anything relating to why I wasn't the reason I came here anyway. I'll leave that matter for later, for now however. Naruto's eyes watched with interest as Sho's body switched positions, facing Naruto with his body turned sideways, but his upper body mostly turned to face him, an open palm with his left hand out, while his right hand was pulled back at his side. Naruto's senses quickly went on alert at the sight. I don't know what that stance is, but I know he isn't doing it for show. Guess he really is getting serious. Sho's smirk grew dark, as his very aura seemed to shift, seemingly becoming calmer and more focused, yet harsher, with a deep sense of foreboding washing over him. He silently whispered his technique, Tenchi Juj, stance of overpowering annihilation. Naruto's rage quickly had been quelled, as his senses suddenly went on alert, knowing full well his opponent was getting serious, and decided to take the fight seriously. Naruto quickly shifted into his Jinga stance, shifting from side to side, yet maintaining a fair distance from his adversary who looked upon with interest. See, you finally decided to start using your actual Capiria training for a change. Have to say I'm happy about that. I'm curious to see what exactly your master managed to teach you in the short amount of time you two spent together. However, Naruto barely had time to blink as Sho was right in his face, rearing his hand back in a knife hand position, Don't expect me to just give you the first move. With lightning speed and great precision, Sho's knife hand struck towards Naruto like a spear. Though as it came close, Sho quickly began to rotate the hand, giving it an appearance of a miniature drill which Naruto barely managed to dodge. Quickly dropping into an esquiva and hitting the ground, only to quickly jump and spin sideways to avoid a second drill strike from Sho, the attack struck the ground. Surprisingly, it didn't create nearly as big a blast of dust as one would expect. Landing on his feet, Naruto prepared to counterattack, only to once again find Sho on the offensive with a third knife strike. Only this time Sho managed to latch on to his opponent's shoulder to keep him from moving. Naruto's eyes quickly widened as the drill-like strike approached him. His position was locked, and he couldn't seemingly slip away, and the knife approached quickly, Sho shouting the technique's name out in triumph. Jininkan Nijiri no Kite. God's fist spinning hand. Naruto, however, reacted quickly, striking Sho's unguarded knee with a low sweeping kick. Striking with sufficient force, Sho's knee and leg bent sideways, sending his whole body into a tilt and resulting in the drill strike missing Naruto's body, and instead going over his shoulder without contact. It was now Naruto's turn to smirk as he looked straight into Sho's eyes. Bit of advice when fighting against someone using Kapiria, you should try to lock their legs up along with their arms. Naruto quickly emphasized his point by bringing his still extended leg upwards into Sho's chin in a powerful knee strike, which effectively broke his opponent's hold on him as well as stunning him. Taking advantage of his brief window of opportunity, Naruto quickly leapt onto one hand, balancing his body sideways and brought up both of his legs in, and then unleashed them into Sho's exposed abdomen. Naruto's expression actually turned gleeful with a nice hint of satisfaction as for the first time since he met him, Sho's normal cocky demeanor had been broken and his was literally bewildered by his opponent's counterattack. Though the blonde Kapiria user only had a brief moment to enjoy it as he watched his tormentor soar backwards into a nearby tree trunk. The sight itself actually prompted a whistle of surprise from Naruto, who'd quickly flipped back to his feet. I've seen birds do some pretty impressive things, but I didn't know they could fly backwards too. Guess you really can fly. Despite the joke, Naruto's guard didn't lower, knowing full well that counter wouldn't have been enough to stop him. Thus, rather than simply letting his opponent get back up and attack him, the blonde chose to return to the offensive. Opting to flip forward towards his opponent, rapidly picking up speed as he advanced. Just as he came within distance of the still present dust cloud, he quickly pulled his knees into his chest and slapped one of his arms onto the ground for support before lashing both legs forward again into a powerful mule kick. The sound of crunching would met his ears, but not the sound of his boots meeting flesh or bones breaking. His eyes quickly caught sight of Sho's outline in the dust, standing just a few inches from his extended legs, though with his back to Naruto. The outline's position quickly shifted, raising its right leg up, before cocking it in place and then lashing out, the boot crashing into Naruto's exposed face, sending the blonde spiraling in the air. However, Naruto managed to quickly adjust himself by rolling backwards, using the momentum to land on his feet and look back at Sho in anger. Not wasting any time, he moved into attack, unleashing a fast, spinning aromatic kick which Sho quickly blocked with his forearm. Pushing the offending limb away in an attempt to knock his opponent off balance, Naruto instead leaped forward in the direction his body was pushed, landing on Sho's exposed side and attempted to slam his leg onto his opponent's shoulder only for Sho to move out of the way, quickly sidestepping to the left to avoid the kick, before firing off his own front kick at Naruto's back. Naruto pushed himself up, spun clockwise in the air and cocked his leg back before unleashing a kick to his opponent's head. Sho raised his palm and caught the kick, but the blow itself forced his palm against his head, rattling his brain and causing his ear to ring. That strike actually resulted in Sho's eyes quickly lighting up in fury, as he seemingly changed tactics, wrapping the hand already connected to Naruto's leg around his ankle and then grabbing Naruto's shirt with his other hand. With a quick rotation, Sho pulled his helpless opponent over his shoulder and slammed him hard onto the ground. Following the throw, Sho looked down at his fallen enemy before shifting his hand into a familiar-looking knife hand strike. Naruto's eyes shot up in terror, knowing exactly what was coming next. Sho's hand quickly began rotating, picking up speed with each second. If Naruto was even being honest, He'd swear it was actually spinning even faster than before. Shou's eyes quickly became like scopes, targeting his opponent with hawk-like precision, his smile growing before he plunged the appendage directly into Naruto's stomach. Jinkanajiri Nukite. Naruto's scream instantly died the moment the strike made contact, his body incapable of making a single sound as the pain was seemingly so great his mind couldn't properly process it. Yet the sounds of torn flesh, cracking bone and blood splashing like a raging river echoed across the land, in every direction. Shou's eyes became blank and expressionless at the moment of contact, his mind seemingly acted on instinct. Yet they quickly regained their glow as he looked at his, excuse the pun, handiwork. Shou looked down on his opponent, a look of actual cold contempt for a brief instant as he spoke, "Creatures like you shouldn't be talking about flying in the sky. Keep your nose buried in the dirt like the rest of your kind." His words, however, fell on deaf ears, Naruto gasping for air at the strike, blood leaking from his mouth as he also tried to fight off the pain. Shou's normally present smirk had disappeared as looked down at his enemy's current state. "You should count yourself lucky. If my master had been the one to use that technique on you, you'd have birds coming out of the new hole in your chest. Though, I guess having a somewhat punctured abdomen still isn't an especially pleasant experience now, is it?" Shou's eyes glanced at the injured fighter, a look of disappointment crossing his face, replacing his early look of mirth, "Though, even with that injury, I was hoping you'd prove to be more of a challenge. After all the stories I heard about you from Sujetsu and the mention of how great your master was, I simply can't believe that this is all the skill you can somehow muster?" The sound of brief gasps for air filled his ears, along with the sound of the blonde slowly trying to raising himself from the ground. His eyes glanced at Shou with an obvious look of contempt and a bit of hatred, which his opponent calmly scoffed at. "Man, you do look pathetic. Now you look more like a helpless puppy than a dog. Then again, pretty much anything would look weak given the state and performance you gave me. Pity, really." Shou quietly turned his back to Naruto, looking completely disinterested in continuing the fight, a fact that actually caused Naruto's rage to begin burning again. Shou slowly began his motion of leaving the scene. "If you can somehow manage to get back up and make your way back to that little dump of a restaurant you like so much, then do me and yourself a favor and stay away from YOMI. Clearly your master was wrong to pick you. Maybe I should ask him if he'd be willing to train me instead, perhaps." Shou then paused again for a moment. "Of course, even if you did forget this whole thing happened, you are still a YOMI member in a technical sense, and being defeated even by another member can still be seen as a genuine defeat, at which point you'll likely be killed anyway. Not to mention, since your little girlfriend and her comrades are enemies of our organization, I'd say it's likely they'll be targeted as well and more than likely killed. Oh well." And in that instance, for whatever reason, Naruto suddenly felt something inside him snap. The feeling itself was pure yet also wild and violent, a feeling not unlike one he'd felt in the past from the Nine Tails, but there was something more primal about this feeling, more instinctive and most of all, more vicious. Shou's own eyes quickly widened as he too felt a similarly dark presence behind him grow exponentially and actually causing the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Almost as if a giant pair of eyes were staring at him with an uncontrollable urge to kill. Shou quickly turned around and his face developed a look of shock at the sight before him. Naruto, the person less than a minute ago he'd effectively slammed into the ground and carved a hole several inches deep into his chest cavity, and could barely stand, was now standing up without any visible issue. What's most, his posture had changed. He was slightly hunched over, his arms hanging limply and his eyes shadowed by his hair. Yet despite his lack of movement and odd posture, Shou unconsciously felt the need to guard himself, practically seeing the dark aura surrounding him. Strangely enough, it was a feeling Shou recognized from his time in YMI, this feeling of hostility and rage, its Do ki. I suspected he was a Do-type fighter given his temper, yet this ki, it's so potent, practically dripping with malice and intent to kill. I've never felt anything like this, at least not from someone who isn't a master. Shou's thoughts were quickly interrupted by a low growling noise emanating from Naruto's throat. His body began to shift, slowly at first, with his arms shaking as they moved while his body actually seemed to crouch lower to the ground to an extent. As he moved, the growling grew louder, reminiscent of a vicious dog preparing to attack or defending its territory. It was a rather unpleasant sound for Sho, and it made him feel uneasy. Yet Naruto still hadn't made much in terms of movement, and it made his opponent stare at him for another moment of time. Though that moment barely lasted, as in the next second Naruto was gone, vanished from his sight. Sho's eyes shot up, quickly scanning the area for his opponent, or rather that's what he would have done, if not for his eyes temporarily losing sight as a result of a solid right hook plowing into his gut, which was then followed up with a left cross to the left side of his face, his neck jerking to the side with borderline bone-snapping force. Quickly he felt a pair of hands clench his skull and turn in to face his attacker, and it was at this point that Sho got a good look at his opponent's visage, and if he was being completely honest, for the briefest of moments Sho was legitimately terrified. As to why, simply put, Naruto no longer looked like an angry teen or even a violent individual. He literally looked like a beast. His teeth were clenched tightly, fully exposing his longer than normal canine teeth, while also seemingly giving the rest of his mouth the illusion of appearing as fangs. The boy's blonde hair had suddenly become much wilder and untamed, reminiscent of animal fur. What really put the fear in the blue-haired teen's mind, however, were the eyes. The pupils themselves were sharp and narrow, eyes only found in a predatory animal with a lethal intent to kill, and that was literally all he could see in those eyes. Eyes themselves typically acting as a mirror to the soul, overflowing with a stream of emotions and thoughts. Now that river was all but empty, no joy, no anger, no sorrow, only bloodlust and intent to kill in the most brutal fashion. This sight brought a single thought into Sho's mind that passed slowly as time seemed to slow to a crawl. All the while the fearsome blonde slowly pulled Sho's head towards his own, though in the real world it was done with quick speed, his forehead targeting Sho's nose, intent on breaking it and possible fracturing his skull. Yet Sho ignored the oncoming pain, only thinking one thing as the contact happened: it would appear I was wrong in my assumption of you after all, Naruto. You're no dog at all. No dogs wish they had the kind of iron-like gaze that would make even the bravest man turn tail and run. No, you, my friend, are a beast, a wild, untamed creature of instinct, capable of only destruction and death. Not bad, my friend, not bad at all. Any thoughts Sho had after that were promptly interrupted by his nose and forehead crashing into Naruto's, striking like a car crash with bone clashing and crashing against each other. Though Naruto wasn't apparently satisfied with the strike and proceeded to continue the assault, rapidly headbutting his opponent multiple times, hoping to shatter his opponent's skull like an egg. Seemingly not satisfied with the damage already done, Sho suddenly was pushed back slightly before being struck hard in the jaw by a strong armada kick from his opponent. The blonde followed up by sending 2 Maya Lua de Compasso strikes to the same spot. Then, without even pausing for the slightest moment, facing Sho's front, Naruto did a fast backflip, smashing his left foot into his opponent's exposed jaw, knocking him back several more feet. Surprisingly, the strike actually seemed to knock Sho out of his daze, with him quickly landing back on his feet, an eager look on his face. Well, looks like this dog has some teeth on him. Quickly shifting into his karate stance, the blue-haired teen quickly blurred forward. Let's see how long before they break. With a loud battle cry, Sho unleashed multiple punches. First a straight punch, then a high punch and a low punch, before moving into an arm swipe. Yet his opponent easily slid and weaved his way around them. Sho quickly pulled his arm back and tensed his arm up before sending out a much stronger straight punch. Naruto, however, leaned back to avoid the strike, which hit nothing but air. The blonde quickly landed on his hands and feet, landing in an almost crab walk-like position, before shooting his right leg straight up into Sho's chin. Naruto then flipped onto his stomach, balancing himself on his hands and then smashing his feet into Sho's stomach in rapid succession. Each kick landing with the force of automatic fire, yet Naruto wasn't finished. He quickly hoisted his body up on his hands, extended his legs out and proceeded to perform a windmill kick, sweeping Sho's legs out from under him, while continuing to rotate with his leg, then slamming harshly into Sho's exposed sides. Sho hit the ground hard, but Naruto was a far cry from finished. Kicking himself off the ground, the teen spun himself around Sho, whose upper body lifted itself off the ground as a result of the impact, and Naruto proceeded to again rotate his body, keeping himself low to the ground before cocking his leg in and kicking directly into Shou's back. The blue-haired teen gasped in intense pain as spit and blood flew from between his open lips. His body became airborne once more before his attacker let loose another fierce roar. Naruto snarled before going into a handstand and then wrapped his legs around Shou's exposed neck and then, in an impressive feat of upper and lower body strength, sent the teen towards the ground. The attack should have ended the Wyomite teen. Thankfully for him, however, he'd managed to regain enough of his sense to quickly curve his legs into a ball as he made his descent to the ground, before kicking his leg out, which slammed into the ground with enough force to halt his further descent. Naruto, having let go his opponent once he was sent towards the ground, quickly pushed himself back to his feet, glaring at his enemy with rage and quickly moved towards him, intent on continuing his assault. Shou, however, tried to stop him with another straight punch. Naruto reacted faster, first blocking the punch with a benchao, before snaking his leg around Shou's arm, placing his inner thigh atop Shou's forearm and his lower leg under and around his elbow, locking the limb firmly in place. It was a movement that actually surprised Shou, honestly looking puzzled at this unfamiliar tactic, to where it almost looked like he wanted to know what direction the technique was going. It was a short-lived feeling, as Naruto quickly bent backwards as if doing another backflip, yet actually bent his leg in an almost squatting manner, before also placing his palm firmly on the ground. The result of the shift in weight caused Shou to literally be dragged forward and threw him off balance. Now firmly locked on the ground, Naruto utilized his planted arm and legs to increase his lift and promptly completely his back flip. Only this time he actually managed to flip the bound Shou as well flat onto his back as a result. The blonde quickly moved to his groundwork, quickly spinning back from his downed opponent, before attempting to perform a sort of front flip. Only once his body started to fall forward, he pulled one of his legs in, indicating his intention was to shift to an axe kick, using the added momentum of the flip to increase the effectiveness. The offending leg dropped down on Shou's abdomen with the force of a sledgehammer, his bones loudly cracking in response to the strike, with Shou gasping from the attack but not letting out any sort of scream. Interestingly enough, the spot he just struck was the same spot Shou had used his knife hand strike on, which brought the now savage teen out of his rage for a moment to smirk in satisfaction at returning the pain his blue-haired opponent had given him. With another quick rotation, the blonde was back on his hands before getting to his feet, entering his Jenga stance while keeping his eyes on his opponent, awaiting his response despite clearly having the advantage and being in a perfect position to finish him. Well, Shou chuckled. That was certainly interesting. The now feral teen let out a full-blown roar of sheer contempt, almost spitting at the ground as he looked at his downed opponent, who despite the beating he just took was managing to get back up to his feet, though this time for some degree of effort. Shou's rise from the dirt took a few more moments than usual, though he tried fairly well to ignore the pain shooting through his body. Once he was standing, he brushed some of the dirt away from his body. Though his face displayed confidence, internally he was somewhat conflicted about his next course of action. This fight hasn't exactly been going as I expected. Beyond him actually having more skill than originally predicted, I definitely wasn't prepared for this feral doki he's leaking out of him. His thoughts quickly paused as he scanned over Naruto more closely, taking in his more feral appearance from a more composed perspective, noting the blonde's body shaking, almost seemingly trying to fight off the bloodlust seeping through his body while also holding himself back as best he could manage. The sight of this sent the gears in his head spinning. Seems he isn't used to this kind of power release. Then again, I remember Master Akira mentioning how do fighters have a tendency to become especially savage when they first unlock their do ki, even more so when they have little training in how to properly control it. Another quick scan made him also take into account the blonde's demeanor, as sweat seemed to be dripping from his brow and his breath was heavy, yet his ferocity still remained strong, if a little bit strained. Using that much power with so little control, he's clearly running on fumes and can't keep this up for much longer. Though based on those hits, I have a feeling he'd lay me out if I tried to run out the clock on him. Guess that leaves one option. His decision reached, Shou straightened his body out, garnering attention from Naruto, whose defense tightened at his adversary's movement. Shou offered him another one of his smiles, though clearly one filled with a slight degree of excitement not seen prior, You really should feel proud of yourself, my friend. Before we even met, I had a fairly low opinion of you. I pictured you as little more than a weak, helpless bug, not worthy to join our ranks." Another loud growl at the insult only merited another chuckle from Sho along with a casual hand wave. "Yet through this fight you've managed to tear down every assumption I had of you, and you've even managed to earn a bit of my respect in that regard." With another pause, his stance quickly shifted, his left arm raised above his shoulder, his hand assuming a claw-like shape, while his right arm as rotated down, his hand near his knee and his hand in a similar position as his left. In that instant Naruto's feral senses went haywire. His eyes growing increasingly large, goosebumps and the hairs on his neck actually started to stand at attention, and his body actually began to shake, not from angry but excitement and fear, as a very odd energy seemed to exude itself from Sho's body. What made the energy odd itself was that it had a feeling of hostility and rage similar to Naruto's own energy, yet also a much calmer, more docile feeling not unlike the kind he'd felt from his master soul. The seemingly opposing energies seemed to gather around Sho's body, crashing against each other like two beasts fighting for dominance, with either side able to secure a foothold. Sho's grin grew wide, his eyes almost seemed to glow as the energy seemed to encapsulate him in a layer that, despite not being visible, both fighters could feel. "As a show of my newfound respect for you, I'll give you a glimpse of a power, said to be the absolute peak of strength in the world of martial arts. A technique even to this day, no person has been able to truly master." Sho's grin became a fully grown smile, his energy actually seemingly causing wind to kick up around him as the two waves of energy seemed to be compacted together through an unknown force, turning the two waves into a massive tsunami of energy. All of which was clearly directed at Naruto, seemingly to be swept away with the tide. As the energy mixed, Sho spoke words that would forever be burned in Naruto's memory, a reminder along with the sensation he felt that day and a technique he would not soon forget. "See Degui! Roar as one!" With the force of a miniature explosion, Sho's ki suddenly burst from all around him, his body seemingly pulsating with the power that coursed through his body. Oddly enough, Naruto noted that as an apparent side effect of the power, Sho's right eye suddenly became pitch black in color. Sho meanwhile, merely smirked at his opponent's gaze. Truly something to behold, isn't it? A merging of energies so different that even when combined they cannot remain together for long, and the risks the technique yields are not to be ignored. However, in a flash Sho appeared before Naruto, his fist smashing into Naruto's ribs with the force of a high-powered rifle. The combination of energies grants the fighter unparalleled power of the body that could never be achieved through ordinary training methods. So the trade-off isn't a complete waste. Sho's words fell on deaf ears, however, as he noticed that Naruto, despite taking his punch head-on, hadn't actually moved an inch from the spot he was in. He quickly noted that, much to his own surprise, the blonde actually managed to raise both his hands up to lessen the impact of the punch itself. Though the feat itself was also helped by the dramatic increase in strength his extremely dense do-ki had granted him, otherwise such a punch would have likely crushed his arms and body in an instant. The scene quickly shifted in tone, as Sho felt another wave of heavy do-ki return in force as Naruto's head snapped up, glaring at him with piercing eyes and roaring straight in his face. Both hands latching firmly onto his outstretched fist before leaping up and sending a roundhouse kick to Sho's jaw. The high-powered teen continued to grin as he quickly leaned back to avoid the kick, before aiming his free arm at his opponent's arms, wrapping his hand firmly around Naruto's forearms and taking advantage of his current airborne state, proceeded to spin intent on slamming his opponent onto the ground once more. Before he hit the ground, however, Naruto promptly slammed his feet onto the ground, anchoring himself enough to lessen the impact, cracking the ground in response. With a quickly flick of his leg he unleashed a kick at Sho, his leg moving towards a 90-degree angle towards his enemy's exposed face. Sho, however, quickly released his hold on Naruto and leaped back to avoid the strike, smirking all the way as his adversary flipped around to face him before charging at him, the look of murder in his eyes. Sho's glee reached its peak as Naruto unleashed his attacks, multiple vicious kicks coming from every angle with enough power behind them to shatter bones, yet his enhanced state allowed him to block them with ease. Naturally, they still hurt like hell, but at this point Sho was having so much fun he honestly didn't give a damn anymore. And to think, I thought for even a second this would be boring. Forget killing this guy or having him kill himself. I make sure he lives to join YMI if only so I can fight him some more in the future. This is way too much fun. Shou's glee quickly translated to his fighting. He quickly started to pick up speed, deciding to take full advantage of his brief power increase. With the simplest of ease he moved to the side of an oncoming armada kick, quickly grabbing the offending limb before also grabbing his opponent by the neck of his shirt, and then tossing him over his shoulder like a sack of rice. Naruto, however, quickly spun forward to right himself, planting his feet firmly against a nearby tree, going into a crouch before pushing off and rocketing towards his enemy, letting loose a powerful straight kick. Shou in response countered with his own straight punch, colliding head-on with Naruto's kick. The two limbs crashing against each other with titanic force, the shockwave blasting away everything in the immediate vicinity. Naruto's kick, however, quickly showed that it was stronger, owed mainly to the combination of his own ki and the push-off from the tree. His opponent, however, seemed one step ahead of him, as he quickly pulled his arm back to release the tension that was holding his opponent in the air, before sending him back to the ground with a hard backspin kick to the stomach. Yet even that wasn't enough to keep him down as he quickly flipped back to his feet, his effectively halted as he had become too angry to concentrate on the technique, and was simply interested in crushing Shou. Shou just laughed at the murderous look, not the least bit intimidated. Man, you are just relentless, you know that? If this were any other situation I'd love to fight you till daybreak, but unfortunately my master is a bit of a stickler for time and is more than likely already here in Japan looking for me. So I'm afraid we'll have to cut this fight short. His words clearly didn't inspire any good feelings from his opponent, whose murderous look increased tenfold, his ki becoming heavier and more malevolent. In truth, while Shou's comment was true, his real reason for his bluff was that he was reaching the limit of which his body could handle the Seed-Gui technique. Ordinarily a fighter was lucky to maintain the state for maybe a minute before their body fell apart. Shou, however, had greater mastery of the technique, allowing him to control it for an extended period while also knowing to only use the technique in short, controlled bursts to avoid long-term damage. Sadly, because of the intensity of the fight, that time limit had expired much more quickly, and he was reaching the end of his technique. Naturally, even though it wouldn't cause lasting damage, the end result would be him being too sore to fight at his peak, and with Naruto still blasting out his do-ki by the bus load, he needed to end this fight now, or at least knock him down long enough to get away. Of course he wasn't the least bit concerned, keeping his smile present while Naruto looked at him with contempt, his mind finally managing to get out of the rage-filled haze, if only briefly, as he managed out a few words. And just what makes you think for even 1 second I'm gonna let you walk away from here after all the crap you've put me through? His last words were followed by a furious growl from his throat, to which Shou smiled back. Well, that's easy, my friend. In fact, it's so easy I actually have 2 reasons for you. As if mocking him, the blue-haired karate fighter held up 2 fingers as he began his count-off, the first being that right now I know that isn't really you speaking, or at least you not being in the best state of mind. Right now, you may be acting all tough and feral, but I'd say after a few more minutes you'll be thinking a lot more clearly and hopefully a lot less viciously. Naruto raised an eyebrow at his first reason, though didn't think much of it, while noting Shou's eyes narrow a bit at his second reason. And reason number 2 is that for all your tough talk, you and I both know you can't kill me. Ignoring the fact that it would only lead to more problems for you from YMI, and I know you don't want that. I can tell just by looking in your eyes you're trying to keep all this a secret from your little girlfriend. He quickly paused as his grin again shifted to sadistic for a moment. After all, if she learned what you really are, what you're really capable of, would she still stand by you? I wonder. His comment did its job as Naruto's do-ki flared back to life, his face becoming even more feral at the comment as he geared up for another attack, while Shou moved into a familiar-looking stance. Guess I touched a nerve there, didn't I? He quickly flared up his own ki in response. A massive gale of wind kicked up as the energy of the two seemed to clash against each other, like 2 furious animals locked in mortal combat. Like the dragon versus the tiger. Naruto promptly placed the heel of his foot on the ground in a familiar position, before dragging it against the ground, hard and fast. In an instant, his leg was suddenly almost glowing red, a thick layer of steam forming from his shoe as he readied his final attack. Perna de Deus de Sol. The words were surprisingly empty despite his prior anger, yet to show he might as well have been not speaking at all. His eyes were instead staring intently at Naruto's technique, his mouth practically watering at the sight, while his eyes glistened, like a kid in a candy store. So that's it. One of Soul's legendary Capiria techniques, the leg of the sun god. It's even more impressive up close. Sho's admiration continued despite shifting into his own stance as his hand entered into a familiar knife hand strike. I think it's only fitting to counter it with one of my master's own techniques. His hand quickly began to pick up speed, once again resembling a drill, only this time its speed was greatly enhanced by his combined ki, to where the technique resembled a mini tornado in his hand, the attack trained solely on Naruto. The god of the sky versus the god of the sun. Let's see who's the true lord of the heavens, shall we? In that brief instance between words, both fighters rocketed towards each other, eyes focused solely on each other, and nothing else. The sky, the earth, the plants, everything seemed to fade away from them as they drew closer. Sho's look of glee shining through with each passing second, while Naruto found himself struck with a sense of déjà vu, once again finding himself about to clash with another rival in a strangely poetic setting. Yet his mind attempted to block the thought out as he cocked his leg back and unleashed his heated kick with all the power he had, Sho responding in kind with his hand. Jinkan Najiri Nukai, God's fist spinning hand. Perna de Deus de Sol, leg of the sun god. Both attacks collided with the force of a landmine. The shockwave generated sent ripples of air in every direction, bark from the nearby trees cracked and shattered, the earth and wind howled in agony at the impact. At the same time the air seemed to increase in temperature, as Sho's fast moving had quickly began to spread the heat from Naruto's kick in every direction, and at the epicenter it wasn't much better. Despite the heat and force generated from their combined attacks, either fighter was willing to give the other any ground. Naruto himself roaring in fury as his do-ki increased in force, his leg gaining greater strength, and he pushed Sho back, who quickly dug his feet deep into the soil as he pushed back further with his hand. Of course Sho could feel that Naruto's ki was being concentrated into his leg to increase the strength of his kick, thus allowing him to push back. Sho of course realized that his time with the seated Gui was nearly at an end, thus decided that it was best to end the situation before he found himself in a position he could escape. So he quickly focused his remaining united ki into his technique and pushed forward with all his remaining power. Naruto likewise, upon feeling his rival's strike increase, subconsciously transferred even more of his ki into the attack. What the fighters didn't know was that due to the massive consideration of ki they were putting into their attacks, the energies themselves were effectively duking it out, and quickly building up to the point where the small space between them wasn't big enough to contain it, something both parties realized a little too late. Boom! In the briefest of instances both Naruto and Sho were knocked backwards and flat on their collective asses, but a mini explosion was generated from their little power struggle, effectively ending the clash. Naruto was the first to recover, slowly sitting up as he shook his head clear of the ringing that was pulsing through his ears and trying to clear up the rage-induced haze he'd been under. He quietly raised his head and observed the damage that had been caused, looking upon the scene with a slight degree of awe, before looking down at his own hand suspiciously. Just like that time with Suigetsu. I let my anger take control, yet it felt different this time. Was definitely a lot stronger, almost felt like I didn't have any control at all. Better talk with the fox about this when I get the chance. Quickly placing that thought into the back of his mind for later, the collapsed former ninja attempted to get up, only to literally feel his whole body feel the full weight of the pain of his little bout with Sho. The blonde actually bit down, trying his best to fight back the howl of pain that would have occurred had he not silenced it. Opting not to move, lest he aggravate his aching form, the blonde slowly observed his body to examine the full extent of the damage. For the most part the damage seemed more internal than external, as his clothing didn't sustain too many rips and tears, save for the rather large hole in the middle of his chest where Sho's attack landed. Of course there was also the matter of the bloodstains covering his shirt and pants, as well as the dirt, and most evident his left foot was currently still smoking from using his master's signature attack, though thankfully the wind for Sho's own attack managed to cool it off quickly enough before it could do any serious damage. The blonde let out a quiet sigh as he scratched his head in annoyance. Bad enough I have to get into a fight with that asshole Sho, now my clothes are all torn apart. No way I just sweep this one under the rug with Renka, I can already hear her asking me questions. Naruto quickly paused as his senses quickly directed his line of vision to Sho's own spot of contact, to which Naruto frowned heavily at the sight. The reason being was that Sho, whom Naruto up to a few minutes ago was pummeling into the ground, was standing up once again, albeit with a clear degree of effort and strain, the hand he used to block Naruto's own technique red hot from the heated kick, yet his smile was still present as always. Naturally, Naruto continued to glare at the smiling teen but only managed to earn a chuckle from him. You know, it's kind of hard to be intimidating when you flat on your ass with the mobility of a rock. His chuckle continued, though Naruto quickly spotted the slight strain in both his voice and facial expressions, which earned him his own smirk. Well, I could say the same to you. Pretty sure having the physical stability of a house of cards doesn't come across as particularly scary either. Sho just smiled again, laughing at the comment, clearly not the least bit offended maybe, but that's part of the price you pay for using that technique. Then again, pretty much any kind of strength requires some degree of pain, but I might have pushed it a little too far. Regardless, I feel I got what I wanted in the end, and that's good enough for me. The YOMI member quietly proceeded to knock the remaining dirt from his clothes before taking another look at Naruto. We'll call this one a draw for now. No need to start an argument over who won since we're both big enough to admit when we're beat. At least this way we can have a rematch in the future. Hopefully by then you'll get that power of yours under control. Naruto's eyes narrowed at the comment referring to his rather unknown ability, and was clearly interested in learning more about it, and possibly controlling it better. Though at the same time there was still something he wanted to get across. So you're not gonna kill me then? Even though I made it clear I'm not interested in joining you, or why am I? His comment was completely serious, and he awaited Sho's response, half expecting a chuckle or perhaps a cold comment. Instead what he got was Sho laughing like a man for a moment, which was actually a bit funny for Naruto as the blue-haired fighter seemed to forget his injuries and actually started bending over in pain as he laughed. Despite this, however, Sho still managed to get a few words out to Naruto. Kill you? No, my friend, I have no interest in killing you. Hell, I never had any interest to begin with. After all, we're not really allowed to kill another member of YOMI unless they are defeated in battle, and as I already stated, this fight counts as a draw, so no harm, no foul really. Besides, Sho's eyes locked onto Naruto with the precision of a sniper scope, his eyes glowing with excitement as he looked upon him. You've proven to me that, while you might not be a bird that is worthy to join me in the skies above, either are you a lowly worm, or even a weak dog as I originally perceived. No, right now you're more like a caged beast, a creature with unmistakable power and fury, whose only weakness is that his true potential remains locked away, bound to the earth until his ferocity severs his bindings and unleashes his power for the worlds to see and fear. Naruto's ears held on to each word, finding himself both puzzled and intrigued at his opponent's words as Sho's expression became more serious, yet the passion and excitement in his eyes also grew in intensity. Today I briefly glimpsed the fearsome potential that dwells deep inside of you. Though it's only a small fraction of the power you truly possess, and until you finally break away from whatever is keeping that strength contained, fighting you would feel like a wasted effort. So I'll leave you now in the hopes that during the time between our next meeting you'll continue to grow stronger, so that our next bout will be a more entertaining battle. Of course, till then, well, I'll leave you to your own devices. With those words, Sho turned his back to Naruto and began to walk away, leaving his downed opponent to simply sit, musing over what had just taken place. Though Sho almost stopped walking for a second before casually waving his arm in a somewhat goodbye-like gesture, as he spoke one last time. One more thing, my friend. As I said, the only way you can escape from YOMI is if you die or are defeated and then die. It's not something you can truly escape, and you will eventually join us, whether by your own will or some outside force. The day will come when you too descend into the darkness. But for now, enjoy your time in the light while it lasts. I can assure you it's a fleeting feeling. And with those parting words, Sho Kano promptly disappeared between the trees, the sound of the wind passing through the branches being the only clear sound present. As birds took to the skies, the sound of wings beating acting almost like a send-off to the mysterious teen, leaving Naruto alone, now left contemplate what just transpired. For a moment he just sat there in silence, continuing to muse over what happened, his hatred for Sho having been quelled over the course of their battle. Now he found himself more confused and admittedly curious over what he'd just been told. Slowly he leaned back, resting his head against the back of the tree, letting the cool winds and bright light of the sun cover him as he gathered his thoughts. Geez, seems like I can't catch a break no matter where or who I end up with. Why am I, all this on top of the crap with Ragnarok? What the heck am I supposed to do about all this? Well, for starters, you could stop moping about it. Naruto's eyes rose for a brief start before dropping down somewhat. Fox? Was wondering when I was gonna hear from you again. Which reminds me, you've been pretty quiet up to this point. I mean, I know you don't exactly like me, but I haven't heard you make any kind of snide comment about me in a while. What's the deal? The fox snarled at the question, almost seemingly offended by it. Your idiocy truly astounds me. Even after all the mental training your master put you through, you still have a pitiful grasp of the obvious. Naruto, lacking the energy for a witty remark, simply scoffed at the comment. For the sake of avoiding an unnecessary argument, let's just say you're right and I'm stupid. Mind filling me in on what I'm clearly too short-sighted to understand? Oh great nine tails. You're lucky your survival and mine are tied together, brat. Otherwise I'd just let you stumble over your own 2 feet until you ended up in incoming traffic. Regardless, remember how I mentioned prior that while your chakra was sealed, a small portion of my chakra that still lingered in your body resulted in you gaining increased strength and power when you became angry? Naruto's interest slowly became piqued at the question. Yeah, I remember you mentioned that. Pretty sure that it was when I used your chakra while in sage mode after the battle with Pain, right? Precisely. At that time your sage chakra had effectively been used up, but some of my chakra still resided within you since there was naturally more of it than sage chakra, which is why that chakra wasn't also fused with your own spirit. Okay, fine. But what exactly does this have to do with you and I being able to speak with each other only during certain intervals? Always so impatient, I'm getting to that. Anyway, as you know, or at least I hope you know, chakra itself is a fusion of a person's physical energy, the energy that allows a person's body to move naturally, and spiritual energy, energy derived from a person's own will and fighting spirit. An individual's chakra network allows them to combine these energies to form chakra. However, when the seal was placed on your body, it effectively made it where your chakra network could no longer function, thus your chakra was split back into its normal physical and spiritual energy states. Starting to understand, brat? Slowly, Naruto's mind began to pick up speed, gradually deconstructing the information given and offering a casual nod. I think I might be. Then you probably know what's next. As mentioned, a portion of my chakra still existed within your body at the time the seal was applied. Thus my chakra was also split into physical and spiritual energy, which then united with your own energies, since the seal prevented it from returning to my own body. The physical energy of my chakra is in part why your physical strength is greater than it was originally, despite you lacking your normal chakra levels. Though that itself is minuscule compared to the spiritual energy of my chakra. Naruto remained silent, awaiting to hear the rest of the fox's explanation. As you've experienced in the past, my own spirit is one derived from elements of intense emotions, specifically rage and bloodlust, and it grows rapidly in power the greater those emotions become. As such, since my spiritual energy is now a part of your own spirit, when your anger reaches a certain peak, the spiritual energy from my chakra ignites, flowing through your body and making an energy almost as potent as normal chakra, though far less controllable. I believe the term is Ki, which works much like adrenaline, offering you greater strength and speed, but because it's energy derived from my own rage, it also makes you act more feral and violent, much like how you acted when fighting that Sho boy. Naruto's mind quickly flashed back to the fight with Sho. Eyes managed to burn through the red haze of rage that clouded his higher mental functions as he attacked the teen like a beast, with little more than bloodshed and murder on his mind. So that explains why I went at Sho like a rabid dog, or fox, so to speak. The Ki itself is derived from intense emotions, and the rage that now exists within your own spirit is highly potent. Thus it can easily overcome your mind and turn you into a literal beast. It's also because of this that we are able to communicate. Since the Ki itself is derived from my own spirit, it creates a small connection between you and I that the seal cannot block, since the connection isn't based on chakra, but only lasts for a short time. Seated in place, Naruto calmly took in the information he was given and was for the most part taking it rather well. Slowly he rose to his feet, his muscles having loosened up after a few minutes of limited motion, though it still caused a few sharp pains to move his arms and legs, but nonetheless he could handle it. So I'm guessing that means this conversation won't last much longer? As I said, the connection itself isn't chakra-based and only occurs when the spiritual energy from my chakra that now flows in you becomes intense enough to form a solid connection, which only happens during moments of intense anger. As you are now, I can already feel the connection fading, so if you have any other questions, better ask them now. At that point, Naruto really only had one thought on his mind as he tried to brush off some of the remaining dirt from his body, before proceeding at a slow pace back to Gekurin, likely aware Renka had long since returned to the restaurant and worried sick about him, a meeting he really wasn't looking forward to. Though really his main concern was what he wanted to ask the fox. After everything that just happened and what Joe said about why am I, what do you think will likely happen in the coming months? The fox remained silent for a moment, trying to think of the best words to convey his thoughts to the blonde while also working to keep things short before their link was broken. Well, if there's anything we've both learned from our shared histories is that peace of any kind never lasts for very long, and that it only takes one small spark to start a massive fire. You've managed to keep things relatively contained so far, keeping your relationship with Ragnarok a secret from that girl and maintain a due identity. However, I get the feeling we've encountered the spark that will set forth the coming blaze. Though as to what will be consumed by it I am not sure. I'm not a fortune teller after all. Gradually, Naruto felt the fox's presence begin to fade, as the link between them weakened due to all his prior anger having long since cooled. Yet the fox was ready to let in some final last words of advice. However, what I can say is this, brat. If that boy is a sample of the things to come, then I suggest you improve your skills, as you heard what he said. If any one of those Wyomai members defeats you or some sign of weakness is shown, they will execute you as well as those you currently hold dear, and I can tell they will make good on that threat. These people definitely seem like the kind who'd have no qualms with something like murder, so you'd better be prepared for the worst. His presence slowly drifting away completely, Naruto let out a saddened breath, somewhat unhappy that his time with the fox was cut short. True, the fox was a total bastard and not the best company, but it was still nice to communicate with someone who knew about his past and who he didn't have to keep secrets from. Of course, he also knew that this meant the somewhat quiet life he managed to acquire over these last few weeks was likely coming to an end, and that also didn't help his demeanor. Guess it was too good to be true. No matter where I go, I always end up getting caught up or sought out by some group of elitist assholes who can't take no for an answer. My bad luck, I guess. Naruto slowly made his way down the path towards Gekurin, hoping that Renka would just accept a simple, "The guy shot his mouth off and I had to kick his ass" excuse without pressing any further questions. All the while, he mentally contemplated how to improve himself for the battles to come, somewhat wishing that Soul had decided to stick around and help him improve, despite the man's lack of subtlety. Hopefully he'd figure something out in the months that came, assuming he even had that much time. Scene change, unknown location. Meanwhile, a familiar blue-haired teen slowly made his way through the forest, musing over the battle he just experienced, pausing briefly as he actually had to clutch his aching abdomen and chest from the harsh blows his took. Definitely shouldn't have underestimated that guy. Sho briefly opened his shirt up and frowned briefly at several large, dark purple bruises that coated his upper body. Additionally, he also raised his right hand, paying close attention to its condition. Clashing with Naruto's leg of the sun god had done its damage and lived up to its reputation. His entire hand was burned, with his glove being completely burned away, leaving small ash marks on his hand. The fingers themselves have several noticeable burns, though only first-degree burns, thus not as serious as they could have been. Thankfully, his own technique had managed to lessen the damage, but only just a bit. Sho's frown persisted as he tried to make a fist, only to receive a nice stab of pain for his troubles as his burned hand shook in agony. Guess that's what I get for playing with fire barehanded. Probably would have been smarter to match him kick for kick. You're lucky that you only received minor burns. Shou's eyes widened somewhat, though quickly returned to normal, as he mustered a fake grin whilst trying to hide his pain as he turned to the voice. Master, what a pleasant surprise. Out of the forest arose a familiar figure. He stood almost 7 feet tall, with a lean yet densely muscular build, clad in a black matrix-style trench coat, with matching pants, gloves, and boots. What little of his body that wasn't covered revealed lightly tanned skin, with only a small amount of facial hair, including a mustache and goatee, in addition to the long shoulder-length black hair that flowed on both sides of his face and head. Two noteworthy features of the man's face was a jagged scar that ran horizontally down his left eye, beginning at his forehead and stopping shy of his lips. In addition to this, he also sported strangely pointed ears, giving him a slightly elf-like appearance. The remainder of his face was very narrow and well-defined, with his eyes obscured by a pair of sunglasses. Otherwise he maintained a very neutral, expressionless face, yet Shou could still feel the man's hawk-like gaze peering into him. Shou, opting to maintain his confident appearance, quietly turned around, fully facing his master, quickly releasing his injured hand to avoid looking weak. I wasn't expecting you to show up so soon. Honestly, I was more expecting Soul himself to appear, but this is still nice. His master, Akira Hongo, otherwise known as the God's Hand, didn't show even a hint of amusement at the comment. Instead, his eyes were clearly trained on Shou's injured hand and bruised body, yet his face remained solid and motionless. Your opponent proved to be more of a challenge than you expected. His tone was completely dull and without a hint of expression, yet was as ice-cold and serious that it was a miracle the temperature didn't instantly drop, yet Shou remained oblivious. I might have gotten a little cocky near the end. He didn't seem all that tough at first, and I honestly thought he was just another worm like all the others. He quietly frowns as he again tried to make a fist with his damaged hand, had to learn the hard way that, while he might not have wings, he certainly has fangs and plenty of fire to boot. Akira silently listened, remaining like a statue before his eyes drifted to the blazing sun above. Your little experience reminds me of the story of Icarus. An individual who believed in the strength of his man-made wings and sought to pit them against the blazing heat of the sun. Akira's hidden eyes quickly focused on Shou's burned hand, and just like Icarus, your wings were burned away by the sun's fire. Thankfully for you, the boy's technique is a far cry from his master's power. Had that been Soul's attack, you'd be little more than ash flying in the wind. Shou merely listened to his master speak, showing him his respect as he nodded quietly to his words before walking towards him. I understand, master. I let my confidence get the better of me and I paid for it. Even so, the fight itself was still enjoyable and I managed to learn a fair amount about our Soul's disciple, so I'd still call this a win in spite of a few setbacks. The stoic master, again, remained silent for a moment before turning around and slowly walking back the way he came, with Shou following in tow. The pair stayed quiet as they moved, Shou placing his injured hand in his pocket, having grown annoyed with trying to operate it properly, opting to wait it out until the pair returned home. Yet as the slowly disappeared into the shadows, Akira's head turned slightly to his disciple. Was he worth it? Shou didn't even stop to contemplate his answer, instead looking at Akira with a look of burning passion and excitement he hadn't seen in the teen in years. His face was practically glowing with exhilaration, as he thought about another clash with his fierce new opponent. Unquestionably,